There's a moment in the early days that I keep coming back to. Not a death, not a battle, something quieter. Shane Walsh stands in a hospital room that smells like disinfectant and decay, staring at what used to be his best friend. The body in the bed doesn't look like Rick anymore. 5 weeks without power, without air conditioning, without anyone to tend the machines that kept him breathing. Shane's hand moves to his pocket, fingers closing around the sheriff's badge he cut from Rick's uniform shirt 3 days ago. The badge is warm from his body heat. It always is now. Shane had come back to the hospital one last time because Laurie kept asking. Not directly, not in words, but in the way she'd watch the tree line when they heard vehicles in the distance. The way she'd save an extra portion of whatever Dale managed to cook over the campfire. The way she'd tell Carl that Daddy was still looking for them, still trying to get home. But Shane knew better. Had known for weeks now. Rick Grimes was never walking out of Harrison Memorial Hospital. The IV bag hangs empty, has been empty for God knows how long. The machines are dark, silent. Rick's body is small under the thin hospital blanket, and Shane wants to cover him properly. Wants to do something that feels like honoring the man who'd been his partner, his brother, his conscience for most of their adult lives. Instead, Shane pulls the badge from his pocket and sets it on the bedside table. Metal against plastic. The sound echoes in the empty room. "I'm sorry," Shane says to the silence. "I'm sorry I couldn't get here sooner. I'm sorry I couldn't save you. I'm sorry about Laurie and Carl, and what I've done, and what I'm going to keep doing." The words don't make him feel better. They're not supposed to. Shane has been carrying the weight of leadership for 5 weeks now, ever since he pulled Laurie and Carl out of King County as Atlanta burned in the distance. 5 weeks of making decisions that keep people alive, of rationing food and water, of deciding who goes on supply runs and who stays behind to guard the camp. 5 weeks of being the person everyone looks to when the walkers get too close, or the generator runs low on gas, or someone starts talking about moving on to find somewhere safer. 5 weeks of pretending he wasn't sure whether Rick was alive or dead, when he'd known the truth from the moment he'd driven past the hospital and seen the military barriers, the abandoned vehicles, the burn marks on the building's exterior walls. Shane wraps Rick's body in the hospital blanket. It's not dignified, not proper, but it's what he has. Rick weighs less than Shane expected. The man who'd carried himself with such solid authority, who'd never seemed to doubt his own decisions, who'd been Shane's model for what a good man looked like. That man weighs almost nothing now. Shane carries him down 3 flights of stairs, past empty nurses' stations and abandoned gurneys, past windows that show the outside world in all its new horror. Walkers move through the hospital parking lot in 1s and 2s, slow and aimless. Shane watches them as he pushes through the stairwell door, Rick's body cradled in his arms. The hospital courtyard has a small garden area, probably meant to give patients and families a peaceful place to sit before the world ended. Shane sets Rick's body down gently and uses his knife to dig in the soft earth near a bench. The ground gives way easily, like it's been waiting. Shane doesn't say anything over the grave, doesn't know what words would matter now. Instead, he takes the sheriff's badge from his pocket and looks at it one more time. The metal is scuffed from years of wear, from Rick pinning it to his uniform every morning, from the weight of authority it represented in a world that still believed in law and order. Shane keeps it. The drive back to camp takes 40 minutes through back roads that wind past abandoned houses and overturned cars. Shane has learned to navigate around the worst of the debris, learned which routes are most likely to be clear of walkers, learned to think 3 moves ahead, because that's what keeping 18 people alive requires. 18 people who trust him. 18 people who look at him like he has answers. The camp comes into view as Shane crests the hill above the quarry. 4 tents arranged in a rough circle, Dale's RV parked to provide cover from the road, a small fire burning where Carol is tending something that might become dinner. It looks peaceful from this distance. Safe. Like the kind of place where people might actually survive whatever the world has become. Shane parks the truck and sits for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, gathering himself for what comes next. Carl sees him first, runs over with that particular 8-year-old energy that hasn't quite been beaten down by 5 weeks of apocalypse. "Shane, did you find anything? Did you find Dad?" Shane looks at the boy who calls him Uncle Shane, who's learned to help Dale check the perimeter, and who's gotten good at staying quiet when the adults need to make hard decisions. Carl has Rick's eyes, but he's been shaped by Shane's world now. "No sign of him, buddy," Shane says, and the lie comes easy because it's the lie that keeps Carl from breaking apart. "But I found some medical supplies, some batteries. We're going to be okay." Carl nods solemnly, accepting this the way he's learned to accept all the disappointments that come with living in a world that doesn't care about 8-year-old boys who miss their fathers. Laurie approaches more slowly, and Shane can see the question in her face before she asks it. The same question she's been asking for weeks, the same hope that she's been carrying like a weight she can't put down. "Nothing," Shane tells her quietly. "Hospital's been dark for weeks. If he was there..." Shane lets the sentence trail off, lets Laurie fill in the implications herself. Laurie nods. Shane watches something change in her face, watches her shoulders settle like she's finally setting down a burden she's been carrying for too long. She doesn't cry. Shane has learned that Laurie doesn't cry where Carl can see her. "Okay," she says. "Okay. Thank you for checking. Thank you for going back." Shane wants to tell her the truth, wants to explain that he didn't just check, that he found Rick's body and buried it and said goodbye to the best man he's ever known. But Laurie is already turning away, already moving toward the fire where Dale is waiting with questions about their next move, about supplies, about how long they can stay in this spot before they need to keep moving. Shane touches the badge in his pocket. Rick's badge now, but Shane's responsibility. That night, after the fire has burned down to embers and everyone has retreated to their tents, Shane sits on the hood of his truck and stares at the stars. Dale joins him after a few minutes, settling beside him with a grunt of effort. "How bad was it?" Dale asks quietly. Shane considers lying, considers maintaining the fiction for Dale too. But Dale is 70 years old and has been watching people lie to each other since before Shane was born. Dale deserves better. "He was already gone," Shane says. "Had been for a while." Dale nods slowly. "And you buried him?" "Yes." "Good. That's good, Shane. Rick would have done the same for you." Shane thinks about that, about the man Rick was, about the decisions Rick would have made in these last 5 weeks, about whether the group would be better or worse off if Rick had been the one making the hard calls instead of Shane. "He would have tried to save everyone," Shane says after a long moment. "Every stranger we met, every group we came across. He would have believed we could find a way to make this work without compromising, without making the ugly choices." "And you think he would have been wrong?" Dale says. "It's not a question." Shane touches the badge in his pocket again. "I think Rick was a better man than I am. But I think being a better man might get you killed in this world. Might get your family killed." Dale doesn't argue with him. Dale has been watching Shane lead this group for 5 weeks, has seen the decisions Shane makes, and the results those decisions produce. 18 people alive when they started with 23. Better numbers than most groups could claim. The badge feels different now, Shane says, surprising himself by speaking the thought out loud. Different how? Heavier. Rick wore it like it meant something about justice, about right and wrong. I wear it like... Shane pauses, trying to find the words. Like it means I'm the one who decides who lives and who dies. Dale is quiet for a long time. When he speaks again, his voice is careful, thoughtful. Rick's world had courts and laws and backup coming when you called for it. Your world has walkers and strangers who might kill you for your supplies. Maybe the badge means something different now, because the world means something different. Shane nods. He's been thinking the same thing for weeks, but hearing Dale say it makes it feel more real, more acceptable. Laurie's pregnant, Shane says quietly. Dale doesn't seem surprised. How long have you known? She told me yesterday. We both know it's mine. And Carl? We'll tell him soon. Frame it as something positive, something to look forward to. Shane looks at Dale. You think that's wrong? Bringing a child into this world? Dale considers the question seriously. I think this world needs children if it's going to be a world worth living in. But I also think children need adults who can keep them safe long enough to grow up. Shane thinks about Carl, about how the boy has changed in 5 weeks of living in Shane's world. More careful, more aware of danger, quicker to follow instructions without asking questions. Rick might not recognize his son if he could see him now. But Carl is alive. Carl is safe. Carl sleeps soundly in his tent every night because Shane makes the hard decisions that keep the walkers away and the food supply steady and the camp secure. That has to count for something. Rick would have wanted us to be happy, Laurie said to him 3 nights ago as they lay together in her tent, listening to Carl breathe quietly 10 feet away. If he really is gone, Rick would have wanted us to find something good in all this. Shane believes that's true. Rick had always been generous, always willing to sacrifice his own comfort for other people's happiness. But Shane also knows that Rick would have struggled with the same thing Shane struggles with, the knowledge that their happiness is built on Rick's death, that their family only exists because Rick isn't here to claim it. The badge in Shane's pocket seems to pulse with weight, like a second heartbeat. Shane looks at the camp, at the tents that shelter the people who trust him, at Dale's RV with its generator humming quietly, at the careful arrangement of vehicles and supplies that represents 5 weeks of learning how to survive in a world that wants to kill them. This is his world now. His responsibility, his people, his choices to make. Rick's badge, but Shane's authority to wield it. Tomorrow he'll need to make decisions about their next supply run, about whether they can stay at the quarry another week, or whether the growing number of walkers in the surrounding woods means it's time to move on. Tomorrow, he'll need to be the person who keeps 18 people alive in a world that's designed to kill them. Tonight, he sits with Dale under stars that don't care about human suffering and feels the weight of leadership settling into his bones like something permanent. The badge grows warm in his pocket. It always does, eventually. Tomorrow, Shane will wake up and be the leader this group needs him to be. Not the leader Rick would have been, but the leader who can navigate this particular version of hell and bring his people through it alive. The badge is his now, all the weight that comes with it, all the authority, all the terrible responsibility of deciding who lives and who dies, and what kind of world they're trying to build in the ashes of the old one. Shane touches it one more time and climbs down from the truck. His watch starts in an hour, and the people sleeping in those tents are counting on him to keep the darkness at bay. There's a shift in the air around camp that becomes obvious 3 days after Shane returns from the hospital. Not the walkers. Those shamble past the quarry's edge with the same mindless persistence they always have. Not the weather, though October mornings carry a sharper bite now. The change is in the way people move around each other, the way conversations stop when Shane approaches, the way decisions that used to be discussed by the whole group now get made by one person standing next to Dale's RV with a sheriff's badge, warm in his pocket. Shane doesn't announce the new rules, doesn't call a meeting or make a speech about leadership transition. He simply starts implementing them, one practical decision at a time. The rationing starts first. Shane divides their food supplies into precise daily portions, marking each container with names and dates in his careful handwriting. No more communal meals where people eat until they're satisfied. No more extra helpings for whoever happens to be hungriest. Every person gets exactly what Shane calculates they need to maintain strength for their assigned duties. Nothing more. It's not enough, Amy complains on the second day, holding up her portion of canned peaches. I'm still hungry. Shane looks at her across the morning fire, his expression patient but immovable. It's what we have. Make it last until tomorrow. But there's more in the RV, Amy says. Dale showed me the inventory. We could eat better for weeks. And then what? Shane asks quietly. What happens when those weeks are over and we haven't found more supplies because we were too comfortable to plan ahead? Amy doesn't have an answer for that. She eats her peaches slowly, making each spoonful last. Andrea watches this exchange with sharp attention. Shane can see her calculating, measuring the distance between Amy's complaint and Shane's authority, deciding which side of that equation offers better survival odds. When Shane assigns her to inventory management the next morning, she accepts without question. The guard rotations change next. Instead of loose shifts where people wander the perimeter when they feel like it, Shane creates a schedule. 4 hours on, 8 hours off, rotating pairs that he selects based on skills and temperament rather than friendship. He assigns himself to the most dangerous shifts, midnight to 4 a.m., when walkers are hardest to see and other survivor groups most likely to approach the camp. Dale objects on the 4th morning, cornering Shane near the trucks as Shane checks ammunition supplies. This isn't sustainable, Dale says quietly. People need rest. They need some sense of normalcy, of choice in how they live their lives. Shane continues counting bullets, not looking up. People need to stay alive. Everything else is luxury. But what kind of life is it if survival is the only priority? Dale's voice carries the weight of his years, the authority of someone who's seen multiple generations make the same mistakes. Rick wouldn't have wanted. Rick's dead. The words come out sharper than Shane intended, cutting through Dale's sentence like a blade. Rick's been dead for weeks, and we're still alive because I've been making the hard choices he couldn't make. Dale falls silent. Shane finally looks up from his ammunition count, sees something like hurt in the older man's eyes. I'm sorry, Shane says, and means it. That wasn't fair to you. You've done everything I've asked. You've kept people fed and housed and hopeful. But Rick isn't coming back, and the rules that might have worked in his world don't work in ours. What makes you so sure about that? Dale asks. Shane touches the badge in his pocket, feels its familiar weight. Because Rick's world still believed in rescue, in the government coming back, in safe zones being established, in this being temporary. My world knows better. The Walker breach happens on the 6th day, and it proves Shane's point more clearly than any argument could have. A small group of walkers, 5, maybe 6, follows some sound or scent to the edge of their camp perimeter. In the old system, whoever spotted them would have called for help, and the group would have gathered to discuss the best approach, noise management, risk assessment, whether to engage or try to lead the walkers away. Shane sees them through his binoculars during the dawn watch, and doesn't hesitate. He signals silently to T-Dog, his assigned partner, then moves down the slope with his knife drawn. T-Dog follows his lead without question. They've practiced this scenario in Shane's new training sessions. The elimination takes less than 10 minutes. Quick, efficient, quiet. Shane and T-Dog drag the bodies away from camp and burn them in a pit Shane had prepared for exactly this purpose. By the time the rest of the group wakes up, there's nothing left but smoke and the metallic smell of burned flesh. "You should have woken us," Laurie says, when Shane explains what happened over breakfast. Shane looks at her across the fire, noting the way Carl sits pressed against her side, listening to every word. "Why? So we could waste time debating while more walkers heard the noise and came to investigate? So Carl could watch his mother put herself in danger for no good reason?" Laurie's jaw tightens. She's not used to being dismissed, not used to Shane making unilateral decisions about her safety. But she doesn't argue, because everyone at the fire can see the evidence of Shane's competence in the fact that they're all still breathing. "It's not about the danger," Dale says carefully. "It's about the principle. We've always made decisions together." Shane sets down his coffee cup and looks around the circle of faces watching him. Andrea, leaning forward with interest. Carol, keeping her eyes down but obviously listening. Amy, still working through her smaller breakfast portions. T-Dog, nodding slightly in approval. Glenn, caught between loyalty to the group's democratic traditions and obvious respect for Shane's tactical effectiveness. "Principles are expensive," Shane says finally. "They cost time and energy, and sometimes they cost lives. Rick could afford them because he believed help was coming. I can't afford them because I know it isn't." Carl speaks up suddenly, his voice small but clear. "My dad would have talked to everyone first." The fire goes quiet. Shane looks at the boy who calls him Uncle Shane, who's learned to help with guard duty and inventory management, who's been shaped by 5 weeks of Shane's practical education in survival. "Your dad was a good man," Shane says gently, "the best man I ever knew. But your dad lived in a world where talking things through was safer than acting fast. We live in a different world now." Carl considers this seriously. Shane can see Rick's thoughtfulness in the boy's face, but also something harder, something that's been forged by weeks of constant low-level fear. "I think you're right," Carl says finally. "I think Dad would understand." Laurie's face goes pale, but she doesn't contradict her son. That afternoon, Shane teaches Carl how to use a knife properly. Not just carrying it, not just knowing which end is sharp, but how to grip it for maximum efficiency, how to angle the blade to penetrate a walker's skull, how to clean it afterward so the blood doesn't attract more attention. These are skills Rick would never have taught an 8-year-old boy. Skills Rick would have insisted Carl was too young to learn, too innocent to need. But Carl learns them quickly and without complaint, the way he's learned everything else in Shane's version of childhood education. How to pack supplies for rapid evacuation, how to stay quiet during guard shifts, how to ration water so it lasts 3 days instead of 1. He's growing up fast, Laurie says to Shane that evening as they watch Carl practice knife grips near Dale's RV. "He's growing up smart," Shane corrects. "Rick would have wanted to preserve his innocence. I want to preserve his life." Laurie nods slowly. Shane can see her working through the logic, trying to find fault with it, and coming up short. In Rick's world, 8-year-old boys played Little League and worried about homework. In Shane's world, 8-year-old boys learn to kill the things that want to eat them. "Do you think Rick would approve?" she asks quietly. Shane touches the badge in his pocket, feels its weight pressing against his ribs. "I think Rick would hate everything about what we've had to become. But I think he'd rather have Carl alive and hard than dead and innocent." That night, Dale calls for a group meeting. Everyone gathers around the fire after dinner, and Shane can feel the weight of anticipation in the air. This is the conversation that's been building for a week, the moment when the group decides whether to formalize what's already happening or try to return to their old democratic process. "We need to talk about leadership," Dale says without preamble, "about how we make decisions and who has the authority to implement them." Shane doesn't speak, doesn't defend his actions or argue for his position, just sits with his back against a log and lets the group work through the discussion themselves. Andrea speaks first. "Shane's been keeping us alive. The rationing, the security measures, the training, it's working." "It's working because we haven't faced a real crisis yet," Dale counters. "But what happens when we disagree with one of his decisions, when his judgment conflicts with our values?" "Then we die with our values intact," T-Dog says bluntly. "Real helpful to our families." Glenn shifts uncomfortably. "I don't know. Shane's approach feels military. Rick was more about consensus, about making sure everyone felt heard." "Rick had the luxury of time," Carol says quietly. Everyone turns to look at her. Carol rarely speaks up in group discussions, usually defers to Ed's opinions. But Ed is on guard duty, and Carol's voice is steady when she continues. "Shane doesn't. When those walkers came this morning, waiting to discuss it could have gotten people killed." The debate continues for an hour. Shane listens to them weigh efficiency against democracy, security against autonomy, survival against the principles they carried from the world before. Finally, Laurie speaks. "I vote for Shane," she says simply. "Official leadership, final authority on security decisions. He's earned it." The vote isn't close. Andrea and T-Dog and Carol support Shane immediately. Glenn hesitates but eventually nods his agreement. Amy follows her sister's lead. Only Dale dissents. "I'll follow the group's decision," Dale says carefully, "but I want it on record that I think this is a mistake. Leadership isn't just about keeping people alive. It's about keeping alive the things that make us worth saving." Shane nods respectfully. "Noted. And Dale? Your concerns are always welcome. I'm not trying to be a dictator. I'm trying to be effective." After the meeting breaks up and people drift toward their tents, Shane sits alone by the dying fire. The badge in his pocket seems to pulse with new weight, official now instead of just carried. Laurie joins him after a few minutes, settling beside him on the log. "How does it feel?" she asks quietly. Shane considers the question seriously. "Heavy. Like everything depends on me not making mistakes. Rick felt that way too, you know. Even before the world ended, when he was just a sheriff's deputy in King County. He used to come home from work and sit in our kitchen, staring at nothing, carrying the weight of every decision he'd made that day." Shane thinks about that, about Rick in their kitchen, in their normal life, struggling with the moral complexity of enforcing law in a world where the law sometimes conflicted with justice. Rick's world had courts to review his decisions, Shane says, supervisors to override him if he was wrong. "I don't have backup." Laurie leans against his shoulder. "You have us. It's not the same thing, but it's something." Shane touches the badge one more time, then pulls his hand away. Tomorrow there will be new decisions to make, new protocols to establish, new crises to manage. Tomorrow he'll have to be the leader this group voted him to be. But tonight, he sits by the fire with the woman who's become his family and watches the stars that don't care about human politics or moral complexity. The same stars Rick would have seen if he'd lived long enough to look up at them. The badge grows warm against his chest, the way it always does. But the weight feels different now. Not just the burden of authority, but the responsibility of a trust freely given. Shane touches it one last time and heads to his tent. His first official night as leader of a group that's chosen survival over comfort, efficiency over sentiment, Shane's hard pragmatism over Rick's generous hope. The badge goes with him, carrying all the authority of the dead world and all the responsibility of the living one. There's a difference between scavenging and taking that Glenn Rhee discovers on a Tuesday morning when Shane hands him a list that's twice as long as any they've used before. Not just medical supplies and canned food, but ammunition, tools, clothing, anything that might give them an edge in the weeks ahead. The list is written in Shane's careful handwriting, each item assigned a priority level, each location mapped with military precision. "This is a lot," Glenn says quietly, studying the paper in the pre-dawn light beside Dale's RV. "Some of these places, I've been avoiding them because they're too risky for one person." Shane adjusts the weight of Rick's badge in his pocket, feeling its familiar warmth. "That's why you're not going alone this time." The team Shane has assembled represents a fundamental shift from their usual supply runs. T-Dog for muscle and mechanical knowledge, Andrea for her improving marksmanship and cool head under pressure, and Merle Dixon, the drifter they'd encountered 3 days ago, who'd proven useful for heavy lifting and had intimate knowledge of Atlanta's back alleys. "Merle's a wild card," Glenn objects. "He's racist, he's loud, and he doesn't follow instructions well." "Merle's effective," Shane counters, "and effectiveness is what keeps us fed." Glenn looks at the badge visible through Shane's shirt pocket, understanding the weight it represents differently now than he would have 2 weeks ago. Before the vote, Glenn might have argued more strenuously, might have appealed to the group's collective conscience. Now he simply nods and accepts the mission parameters. The drive into Atlanta feels different this time. Instead of Glenn's usual careful infiltration approach, parking blocks away, moving silently through back routes, avoiding any signs of other survivors, Shane's strategy emphasizes speed and overwhelming force. "We go in hard and fast," Shane had briefed them at dawn. "Take what we need, establish dominance if we encounter other groups, and get out before anyone can organize against us." T-Dog drives the truck while Glenn navigates from memory, but it's Merle who sets the tone once they reach the city's outskirts. "Look at all these pansies hiding in their little hidey holes," Merle drawls, gesturing at boarded-up buildings and makeshift barriers, acting like roaches, scurrying around in the dark. "We got guns, we got balls. We should be taking what we want instead of asking permission." Andrea glances at Glenn, measuring his reaction. Glenn keeps his eyes on the street map, but his jaw tightens. This isn't how he's operated for the past month. Glenn survives through stealth and courtesy, through building relationships with other scavengers and respecting territorial boundaries. Their first stop is a pharmacy in Midtown. Glenn had marked it weeks ago, but hadn't attempted entry because another group had claimed the block. Today, Shane's team approaches with weapons visible and intentions clear. The Vatos are waiting for them. Miguel steps out from behind an overturned car with 3 companions, automatic weapons held ready but not quite aimed. In canon, this confrontation would have involved negotiation, cultural understanding, and ultimately mutual respect. Glenn would have learned about the nursing home, about the elderly residents the Vatos were protecting, about the complex moral calculus that drives people to claim territory in a collapsed world. Shane's approach eliminates that complexity. "This is our run today," Shane had instructed them. "If you encounter organized resistance, establish superiority immediately. Don't negotiate, don't compromise, don't leave room for future challenges." T-Dog and Andrea flank the group from either side, while Merle steps forward with his rifle prominently displayed. The message is clear without words being exchanged. This isn't a negotiation. "Easy, hermanos," Miguel says carefully. "No need for trouble. Plenty of supplies in the city for everyone." "Not everyone," Merle says loudly. "Just the people with the balls to take what they need." Glenn feels the weight of the moment settling around them like smoke. In his previous runs, encounters with other groups had been careful dances of mutual respect. Information was shared, territories were acknowledged, sometimes temporary alliances were formed. This feels different. This feels like the end of something. "We're taking the pharmacy," T-Dog says matter-of-factly. "You can wait until we're done, or you can leave now. Either way works for us." Miguel's eyes move between the four of them, calculating odds and consequences. His group is outnumbered and outgunned, but more importantly, they're facing people who've clearly crossed lines that Miguel's group hasn't crossed yet. "The old people in the nursing home need those medicines," Miguel says quietly. "Not our problem," Merle responds, before anyone else can speak. The standoff lasts 30 seconds. Then Miguel steps aside and gestures for his people to do the same. Glenn feels something cold settle in his stomach as they enter the pharmacy. The efficiency is undeniable. They clear the shelves of antibiotics, painkillers, and medical supplies in under 20 minutes. But the cost is equally clear in Miguel's face as they drive away, in the knowledge that they've just burned a bridge that Glenn had hoped to maintain. "Good work," T-Dog says as they load supplies into the truck. "Clean, professional, no unnecessary violence." "Speak for yourself," Merle grins. "I was hoping for a little more excitement." Glenn doesn't speak. He's thinking about the nursing home Miguel mentioned, about elderly people who might die because Shane's team took medicines they could have shared or traded for, about the kind of person he's becoming under Shane's leadership. The second location goes even more smoothly, a sporting goods store that Glenn had avoided because it was too exposed, too likely to attract Walker attention. Shane's team approaches with tactical coordination, establishing overlapping fields of fire while Glenn picks the locks. No other survivors contest their claim. They emerge with hunting rifles, ammunition, camping gear, and tactical supplies that will make their camp significantly more defensible. The efficiency is impressive, the results undeniable. It's on the drive back to camp that Merle's casual racism finally creates the confrontation Glenn has been dreading. "Good thing those spics back at the pharmacy knew better than to fight," Merle says, cleaning his fingernails with his hunting knife. "Though I wouldn't have minded putting a few of them down. Clean up the gene pool a little." T-Dog's hands tighten on the steering wheel. "Watch your mouth." "Or what, boy? You gonna cry about it? Tell your mama." The truck goes silent, except for the engine noise and the sound of Merle's knife scraping against his nail. Glenn sees T-Dog's jaw working, sees Andrea's hand moving closer to her weapon, sees the moment crystallizing into something that will define their group's character going forward. In Rick's world, this moment would have led to education, to confrontation, to an attempt to change Merle's perspective through moral argument. In Shane's world, the calculation is different. "T-Dog," Glenn says quietly. "Pull over." T-Dog brings the truck to a stop beside an abandoned gas station. Glenn gets out first, followed by the others. Merle seems confused by the sudden stop until Glenn speaks. "You're walking back," Glenn tells him. The hell I am. Shane sent me on this run same as you. Shane sent you because you know the city, and you can carry heavy loads. We've got what we came for, and now you're a liability. Glenn's voice is steady, matter of fact. Take some water and whatever supplies you can carry. Find your own way. Merle's confusion shifts to anger. You can't just abandon me in the middle of Atlanta. There's walkers everywhere, other groups that ain't as friendly as those Mexicans. Should have thought of that before you showed T-Dog disrespect, Andrea says calmly. We don't leave our people behind. But you're not our people. The confrontation that follows is brief and decisive. Merle reaches for his weapon, but T-Dog is faster and more prepared. Within seconds, Merle is disarmed and facing 3 guns pointed in his direction. This is how it works now, Glenn says, surprising himself with the authority in his voice. We protect our own, and we eliminate threats to group cohesion. You just proved which category you belong to. They leave Merle with a backpack of supplies and directions to the nearest bridge out of the city. Glenn watches him disappear into the urban maze and feels the weight of another bridge burned, another line crossed. The drive back to camp is quiet. Glenn stares out at the passing landscape and thinks about the person he was 4 weeks ago, about the careful relationships he'd built with other scavengers, about the code of mutual aid that had helped him survive the early days of the outbreak. That person feels like someone from a different world. You did the right thing, Andrea says, as they crest the hill above the quarry. Shane will approve. Glenn nods, but he's not sure approval is what he's looking for anymore. He touches the radio in his pocket, remembering Miguel's voice, remembering the nursing home full of elderly people who might not survive the coming weeks without the medicines they'd taken. He could have left half the supplies, could have negotiated a trade that benefited both groups, could have found a way to honor Shane's objectives without completely destroying the relationships that make survival networks possible. But that would have required time and compromise and trust in people outside their immediate group. Shane's world doesn't allow for those luxuries. The camp comes into view, and Glenn sees Shane emerge from his tent to help unload supplies. The efficiency of their operation is immediately obvious. More ammunition than they've had in weeks, enough medical supplies to handle serious injuries, tools that will make their daily survival significantly easier. Outstanding work, Shane says as they display their haul. This is what happens when we approach scavenging like a military operation instead of a charity mission. Carl emerges from Laurie's tent to examine the new hunting rifle, his 8-year-old hands moving over the weapon with practiced familiarity. Glenn watches Shane guide Carl through proper handling techniques and feels the generational shift happening in real time. Carl will never know the world where scavenging meant building relationships with other survivors, where resource acquisition happened through negotiation rather than intimidation, where strength was measured by the community's ability to help others rather than its ability to take what it needed. That night, after the supplies have been inventoried and distributed, Glenn sits by the fire and tells Shane about Merle's expulsion. Shane listens without comment, then nods approvingly. Good call. Group cohesion is more valuable than individual combat effectiveness. Shane touches the badge in his pocket, feeling its weight. Rick might have tried to reform Merle, waste time and energy on education and rehabilitation. We can't afford that kind of idealism. Dale approaches the fire as Shane finishes speaking, settling beside them with his usual careful attention to group dynamics. I heard about the run today, Dale says quietly. Sounds like it was successful from a resource standpoint. Very successful, Shane confirms. We're better supplied than we've been since Atlanta. And the other group? The one at the pharmacy? Glenn shifts uncomfortably. We established dominance without violence. They backed down. We took what we needed. Everyone walked away alive. Dale considers this. But you didn't try to negotiate? Didn't attempt to find a mutually beneficial solution? We took what our people needed, Shane says firmly. That's my responsibility as leader. And their people? The ones who needed those same supplies? Shane looks at Dale across the fire, and Glenn can see the philosophical divide that's been growing between them, crystallizing into something more definitive. Their people aren't my responsibility, Shane says quietly. My responsibility is to the 18 lives sleeping in these tents tonight. Everything else is someone else's problem. Dale nods slowly, but Glenn can see disagreement in his eyes. The older man excuses himself and heads toward his RV, leaving Shane and Glenn alone by the fire. You're troubled by something, Shane observes. Glenn considers lying, considers agreeing that the mission was an unqualified success. Instead, he finds himself being honest. I keep thinking about Miguel, about the nursing home he mentioned, about whether we could have found a way to help both groups instead of just ourselves. Shane touches the badge again, then pulls it from his pocket and holds it in the firelight. The metal gleams dully, reflecting flames that cast shifting shadows across his face. Rick would have tried to help everyone, Shane says finally. Would have spent hours negotiating a deal that left both groups with something. Would have believed that showing mercy made us stronger. Glenn waits for Shane to continue. Rick's not here, and the world that might have rewarded his approach ended when the walkers rose. Shane puts the badge back in his pocket. I'm not trying to build a better world, Glenn. I'm trying to keep our people alive in the world we actually have. Glenn stares into the fire and thinks about Miguel's face, about Merle walking alone through Atlanta's dangerous streets, about the choices that compound into character. The badge in Shane's pocket carries the weight of law enforcement in a world without law, moral authority in a world that punishes morality, leadership in a world that demands impossible decisions. Glenn touches his radio again, thinks about calling Miguel to apologize, to explain, to find some way to bridge the gap their actions created today. Then he thinks about Carl learning to use that hunting rifle, about Laurie's pregnancy, about the 18 people sleeping safely tonight because Shane makes the hard choices. The radio stays in his pocket. Tomorrow there will be more supply runs, more encounters with other groups, more opportunities to choose between Shane's efficient pragmatism and some other approach that Glenn can't quite articulate, but knows he's lost. Tonight, Glenn sits by the fire and feels the weight of becoming someone he doesn't entirely recognize, someone who takes what his group needs and walks away without looking back, someone who expels racists instead of educating them, who intimidates other survivors instead of building alliances with them, someone who survives in Shane's world because Rick's world no longer exists. The fire burns down to embers, and Glenn finally heads to his tent. Behind him, Shane remains by the dying flames, one hand touching the badge that represents all the authority of the dead world and all the responsibility of the living one. The badge grows warm in the darkness, carrying the weight of choices made and bridges burned, of efficiency purchased with isolation, of survival earned at the cost of everything that once made survival worthwhile. But their people sleep safely tonight, and in Shane's world, that has to be enough. There's a sound that doesn't belong in the pre-dawn quiet around their camp, and Shane Walsh hears it before anyone else because he's learned to sleep like a predator, one ear always tuned to the frequency of danger. Not the shuffling gait of walkers, not the natural sounds of the Georgia woods. Something else. Something human trying very hard not to sound human. Shane slips from his tent with his pistol drawn, moving through the shadows between the vehicles with the careful precision he's developed over 7 weeks of keeping 18 people alive. The sound comes again, a suppressed groan, the kind someone makes when they're trying not to cry out in pain. The stranger is maybe 25, white, thin from weeks of poor nutrition, and bleeding through a makeshift bandage wrapped around his thigh. He's dragged himself to within 50 yards of their perimeter, close enough to see the safety their camp represents, far enough away to avoid immediate detection. Shane watches him for 30 seconds from behind Dale's RV, noting the desperation in the stranger's movements, the way he keeps checking over his shoulder like something is following him. The man carries no visible weapons, but Shane has learned not to trust appearances in a world where desperation makes everyone dangerous. "Help!" the stranger whispers into the darkness. "Please, if anyone's there. I'm hurt bad." Shane touches the badge in his pocket, feels its familiar weight, and makes a decision that Rick Grimes would never have made. Instead of offering immediate aid, Shane circles around behind the stranger with tactical precision. Instead of announcing himself with reassurance, Shane presses the barrel of his pistol against the back of the man's skull. "Move wrong and you're dead," Shane says quietly. "Scream and you're dead. Lie to me and you're dead. Are we clear?" The stranger freezes completely, his hands visible and empty. "Yes. God, yes, I'm not armed. I'm just hurt. I need help." Shane keeps the gun pressed against the stranger's head while he searches him methodically. No weapons but a backpack with interesting contents, ammunition that doesn't match any weapon he's carrying, maps marked with locations and group sizes, a notebook with what looks like tactical observations written in careful handwriting. "What's your name?" Shane asks. Brian Foster. I've been alone for 2 weeks. Please, I'm bleeding pretty bad here." Shane examines the wound through the bloody bandage. It's deep, but not immediately life-threatening, the kind of injury that would heal with proper care, but could turn septic without it. In Rick's world, this would have been a simple decision. Bring the injured man into camp, tend his wounds, offer shelter in exchange for his story. Shane's world requires different calculations. "T-Dog," Shane calls quietly. "Dale, I need you out here." The camp begins to stir as Shane's people emerge from their tents with practiced efficiency. No confusion, no debate about response protocols. These are the people Shane has trained for exactly this situation. T-Dog approaches with his rifle ready, while Dale moves more slowly, concern evident in his face as he sees the injured stranger. "He needs medical attention," Dale says immediately upon seeing the wound. "He needs questioning first," Shane counters. "Then we decide what kind of attention he gets." Shane pulls the notebook from the stranger's backpack and examines it more carefully in the growing light. Pages of careful observations about survivor groups, their numbers, their strengths, their vulnerabilities. Notes about supply caches and defensive positions, the kind of intelligence someone would gather if they were scouting for a larger group, or if they were planning raids. "Interesting reading material," Shane says, holding up the notebook so the stranger, Brian, can see it. Brian's face goes pale. "That's not what you think it is." "What I think it is," Shane says conversationally, "is a scouting report. What I think it is intelligence gathering for a group that's planning to hit other survivors. What I think it is evidence that you're not some innocent, injured wanderer." The interrogation that follows is methodical and brutal in its efficiency. Shane doesn't use torture, doesn't need to. He simply applies psychological pressure with surgical precision, using Brian's injury and desperation as leverage points. Laurie emerges from her tent as Shane questions Brian about the group he's traveling with. about their numbers and intentions, about why he was scouting the area around the quarry. She brings Carl with her, and Shane can see the boy's eyes taking in everything, the gun in Shane's hand, the injured stranger begging for mercy, the calculated way Shane manages the interrogation. "Shane," Laurie says quietly. "He needs medical attention. We can question him after we stop the bleeding." "We question him now," Shane says, without looking away from Brian, "before he has time to prepare lies, before his people start wondering where their scout went." Dale approaches with their medical kit, clearly intending to treat Brian's wound, regardless of Shane's interrogation priorities. "Stop," Shane says firmly. "Nobody touches him until I have answers." "He could bleed to death," Dale objects. Shane looks at Dale across the space between them, and in that moment, the philosophical divide that's been growing between them crystallizes into something definitive. "That's his choice," Shane says. "He can answer my questions and get medical help, or he can protect his group's secrets and take his chances with the wound." Carl steps closer to Shane, his 8-year-old eyes bright with interest rather than horror. "What kind of questions, Shane?" Shane keeps his gun trained on Brian while he explains. "Questions about how many people are in his group. Questions about what they're planning. Questions about whether they're a threat to our family." The word family is deliberate, and Carl responds to it the way Shane knew he would. In Carl's world, shaped by 7 weeks of Shane's teaching, family comes first, and anyone who threatens family is an enemy to be eliminated. "How many people?" Carl asks Brian directly. Brian looks between Shane and the 8-year-old boy, clearly struggling with the moral complexity of lying to a child versus protecting his companions. 12, he says finally. "There are 12 of us. But we're not raiders, I swear. We're just trying to survive like everyone else." Shane examines the notebook again, cross-referencing Brian's claim against the tactical observations written inside. The math doesn't add up. "Your notes here mention a group of 19 people at a location 15 miles south, another group of 8 people at a farm near Macon. You've got supply cache locations marked for 3 different groups." Shane looks up from the notebook. "That's not intelligence gathering for survival. That's intelligence gathering for predation." Brian's story changes under pressure, the way Shane knew it would. First he's alone, then he's with 12 people. Then he admits that his group has been following other survivors, taking what they need to survive. "We don't hurt people unless they force us to," Brian pleads. "We just take some supplies, leave enough for them to get by." Carl speaks up again, his voice carrying an authority that would have been impossible in Rick's world. "How do you know what's enough? How do you know they won't die because of what you took?" Shane feels a moment of pride watching Carl apply logical pressure to their captive. This is what leadership education looks like in a world without the luxury of moral absolutes. "I don't know," Brian admits. "I guess we don't think about it that much." Laurie tries one more time to advocate for compassion. "Shane, he's answered your questions. We should treat his wound and give him some supplies. Send him away with a warning." Shane considers this. In Rick's world, this would have been the natural resolution. Mercy combined with strength, compassion balanced with security. But Shane's world operates on different principles. And when he reports back to his group about our location, our numbers, our defenses, when they come back with all 12 of their people to take our supplies? Shane shakes his head. "We're not running a charity operation here, Laurie. We're trying to stay alive." The decision Shane makes next is one that will define his group's moral center for everything that comes after. Instead of killing Brian, which would have been the most ruthlessly practical choice, and instead of helping him, which would have been the most compassionate choice, Shane chooses a middle path that satisfies neither principle completely. T-Dog, get him some basic medical supplies, enough to keep the wound from going septic, nothing more. Give him 1 day's worth of food and water. Shane looks directly at Brian as he continues. You're going to walk away from here, and you're never coming back. You're going to tell your group that this area is defended by a larger, better-armed group than it actually is. You're going to convince them to find easier targets. And if I don't? Brian asks. Shane's answer is delivered in the flat, matter-of-fact tone he's developed for explaining consequences to people who've made poor decisions. Then the next time I see you, or anyone from your group, I won't waste time with questions. The implicit threat hangs in the morning air like smoke from their campfire. Not quite murder, but not quite mercy either. A middle position that protects Shane's people while compromising their moral foundation. Dale tends to Brian's wound with visible reluctance, clearly struggling with the ethical implications of providing just enough help to ease his own conscience without actually solving the injured man's problems. This isn't right, Dale says quietly, as he cleans and rebandages the wound. We should either help him properly or make a clean decision about whether he's a threat. This half measure serves no one. Shane touches the badge in his pocket and considers Dale's objection. It serves us. He gets enough help to walk away, which satisfies your conscience. He gets enough of a warning to keep his people away from our camp, which satisfies my security concerns. Nobody dies today, which satisfies Laurie's humanitarian impulses. And what does it satisfy for Carl? Dale asks pointedly. Shane looks at Carl, who's been watching the entire interaction with careful attention. The boy doesn't look traumatized or confused. He looks like he's learning valuable lessons about how power works in a world that doesn't respect weakness. It teaches him that survival sometimes requires compromise, Shane says. That leadership means making decisions that nobody likes, but everybody can live with. Carl nods solemnly, accepting this wisdom the way he's learned to accept all of Shane's teachings about the world they actually live in, rather than the world they wish existed. Brian limps away from their camp an hour after sunrise, carrying minimal medical supplies and a clear understanding of what will happen if he returns. Shane watches him disappear into the tree line and feels the weight of the badge pressing against his chest. Rick would have made a different choice, would have either trusted Brian completely or recognized him as an irredeemable threat, would have operated from moral absolutes that didn't allow for the kind of calculated compromise Shane just implemented. But Rick's moral absolutes assumed a world where showing mercy to strangers didn't endanger your family, where giving aid to injured people didn't mark your group as a target for future predation, where kindness was a virtue rather than a liability. Shane's world requires different virtues. That evening, as the group gathers around their fire for dinner, Carl asks the question Shane has been expecting. Do you think Brian's group will stay away? Shane considers the question seriously before answering. For a while. Long enough for us to improve our defenses and prepare for the next test. What if they don't stay away? Carl presses. Shane touches the badge in his pocket one more time, feeling its weight settle into something familiar and permanent. Then we'll handle that situation when it comes, the same way we handle every situation, by protecting our family first and worrying about everything else second. Carl accepts this answer with the same seriousness he's brought to every lesson Shane has taught him about survival in a world that doesn't reward innocence or idealism. Laurie watches this exchange with something like resignation in her eyes. She can see Carl changing under Shane's influence, becoming harder and more pragmatic, losing pieces of childhood innocence with each passing week. But she can also see that Carl is alive, safe, learning skills that will help him survive in the world they actually inhabit, rather than the world she wishes existed. The badge grows warm in Shane's pocket as he considers the choice he made today, the line he walked between mercy and ruthlessness, between Rick's idealism and Shane's pragmatism. In Rick's world, showing mercy to Brian would have been the clear moral choice. In Shane's world, sending Brian away alive but warned represents the most compassion he can afford without compromising his people's safety. The difference between those worlds is measured in the weight of a sheriff's badge that carries all the authority of the old world and all the responsibility of the new one. Tomorrow there will be new strangers, new tests of Shane's leadership philosophy, new opportunities to choose between the person Rick would have wanted him to be and the person his family needs him to become. Tonight, Shane sits by the fire with his adopted son, learning lessons about power and compromise, about the cost of survival in a world that doesn't forgive weakness, about the weight of making decisions that keep 18 people alive in a world designed to kill them. The badge pulses with warmth against his chest, carrying the memory of Rick's moral authority and the reality of Shane's practical responsibility. A symbol of law in a lawless world, worn by a man who's learned that sometimes the most moral choice is the one that lets your family sleep safely through the night. Brian's blood has been washed from Dale's medical supplies, but the stain of compromise remains on their group's moral center. Not dark enough to damn them, not light enough to absolve them, but deep enough to mark the difference between the people they were and the people they're becoming under Shane's leadership. The badge grows warm in the darkness, carrying all the weight of authority Rick left behind and all the burden of survival Shane has picked up in his place. There's a moment on a Thursday morning when Laurie Grimes realizes that her monthly cycle hasn't arrived in 8 weeks, and the knowledge hits her like cold water from the creek where she's been washing clothes. Not surprise, exactly. She and Shane haven't been careful about prevention because careful requires planning for a future that might not exist. But the reality of pregnancy in a world that kills children makes her hands shake as she wrings out Carl's shirt. The badge in Shane's pocket has been growing warmer each day, but this morning it seems to burn against his chest as Laurie approaches him near Dale's RV with something complicated in her expression. Not fear, not joy, something more complex that Shane recognizes as the look of someone who's about to change everything. "We need to talk," Laurie says quietly, glancing around to make sure Carl is occupied with his morning knife practice 20 yards away. Shane follows her to the edge of their camp perimeter, where the sound of the creek provides cover for private conversation. Laurie doesn't ease into the revelation the way she might have in the world before, when pregnancy announcements came with time to plan and prepare and celebrate. "I'm pregnant," she says simply. Shane's hand moves automatically to the badge in his pocket, feeling its weight double in an instant. All the authority it represents, all the responsibility for keeping their people alive, suddenly includes responsibility for a life that doesn't exist yet, but will depend completely on the decisions he makes in the coming months. "How long?" Shane asks, his tactical mind already calculating timelines and resource requirements. 8 weeks, maybe 9, since before we became official. Laurie watches his face carefully, reading his reaction. Before the group voted on leadership, before Brian Foster, this baby was conceived when we still thought Rick might come back. Shane considers the implications. A child born into Shane's world rather than Rick's. A child who will never know the father Rick would have been, who will only know the father Shane has become. "How do you feel about it?" Shane asks, because in Rick's world this would have been the first question, the most important question. Laurie's answer comes after a long pause, and Shane can hear 8 weeks of thinking behind it. Terrified, protective, determined. This baby doesn't get a choice about the world it's being born into, but it gets us as parents. It gets your leadership and your protection and everything we've learned about survival. She touches her stomach unconsciously. Rick would have wanted this baby to inherit his world. I want this baby to inherit ours. Shane feels something shift in his chest, some final piece of Rick's authority transferring permanently into his own hands. This isn't Rick's child being born into Shane's world. This is Shane's child, conceived in Shane's world, inheriting Shane's version of survival. The badge grows warm against his ribs, carrying new weight. "Dale," Laurie says that afternoon, settling beside the older man as he checks their water purification system. "I need to tell you something, and I need your support when the time comes to tell the group." Dale looks up from the filter maintenance, immediately noting the seriousness in Laurie's expression. At 70 years old, Dale has seen enough life changes to recognize pregnancy announcements before they're spoken. "You're having a baby," he says gently. "Shane's baby," Laurie confirms. "And before you start thinking about the moral implications of adultery or betrayal or whatever the old world would have called this, I need you to understand that Rick has been dead for weeks. This isn't about choosing Shane over Rick. This is about building something new with the life I actually have." Dale considers this carefully. In Rick's world, this conversation would have been about guilt and forgiveness and the complexity of human relationships under stress. In Shane's world, it's about practical planning for a future that includes new life. "What do you need from me?" Dale asks. "I need you to support this as a positive development when we tell the group. I need you to help plan for the medical requirements. And I need you to help Shane understand that bringing a child into this world isn't just about survival. It's about hope." Dale nods slowly. "Shane's been good to you and Carl. Better than good. He's been devoted. This baby will be lucky to have him as a father." The words carry weight because Dale has been watching Shane's leadership for weeks, has seen how Shane's pragmatic approach keeps their people alive, even when it conflicts with Dale's own moral preferences. "What about the delivery?" Dale asks. "Medical care? Infant needs?" Laurie has clearly been thinking about these practical considerations. Herschel Green's farm is 40 miles north. Glenn's heard rumors about a veterinarian there who might help people. Shane thinks we should approach him about a permanent settlement arrangement. Dale raises his eyebrows. In Rick's world, they might have asked Herschel for temporary shelter. In Shane's world, they're planning to negotiate for permanent residency based on their ability to provide security and labor in exchange for medical care and stable resources. "Shane's already thinking long-term," Dale observes. "Shane's been thinking long-term since the day he became our leader. The pregnancy just gives him a specific timeline to work with." That evening, Shane tells Carl about the baby while they practice knife-throwing behind the trucks. Carl's reaction surprises Shane with its maturity and acceptance. "Will you be the baby's dad?" Carl asks matter-of-factly. "Yes," Shane says simply. "The same way I'm your dad now." Carl considers this, then nods with the same seriousness he brings to all of Shane's teachings about their new world. "Good. The baby will be lucky. You're better at keeping people safe than anyone." Shane feels the badge pulse against his chest, carrying the weight of Carl's trust and the responsibility for a family that's become real in ways Rick's family never could have been. "What about my real dad?" Carl asks after a moment. Shane kneels down to Carl's eye level, giving him the honest answer that Rick's world would have complicated with hope and uncertainty. Your real dad was a good man who loved you very much, but your real dad lived in a different world than the one we live in now. In this world, family isn't about blood or marriage certificates. It's about who protects you and teaches you and stays with you when things get dangerous. Carl nods, accepting this wisdom the way he's learned to accept all of Shane's explanations about how their world actually works. So, you're my real dad now, Carl says, and the baby's real dad, and Mum's real husband. If that's how you see it, Shane agrees. It is, Carl says with finality. It's how it should be. The group meeting that night carries different weight than their previous discussions about leadership and resource management. This is about future planning, about the kind of community they want to build now that they're thinking beyond immediate survival. Shane and Laurie announce the pregnancy together, presenting it as positive news that requires practical planning rather than moral evaluation. Andrea speaks first, and her response reflects the philosophical divide that's been developing in their group under Shane's leadership. This is a mistake, she says bluntly. Bringing a child into this world is selfish. We can barely keep ourselves alive, and now we're going to add an infant to our responsibilities? We're adding a future to our community, Shane corrects. A reason to build something permanent instead of just surviving day to day. Amy supports her sister's concern. Children require stability, medical care, long-term security. We're living in tents beside a quarry. What happens when winter comes? What happens when we encounter a group like Brian Foster's that's bigger than us? T-Dog offers a different perspective. What happens if we spend the next 20 years keeping ourselves alive, but never building anything worth living for? This baby gives us a reason to stop running and start establishing something real. Carol speaks up quietly from her position near the fire. Children make you think differently about risk, make you more careful about the decisions you make. That might be exactly what this group needs. Glenn shifts uncomfortably. I agree with Andrea about the practical concerns, but I also think T-Dog's right about needing something to build toward. Maybe the question isn't whether we should have the baby, but where we should have the baby. This leads to Shane's strategic proposal, the plan he's been developing since Laurie told him about the pregnancy. Herschel Green's farm, Shane says. 40 miles north, established veterinary facilities, sustainable agriculture, defensible position. We approach him with a proposal, our security and labor in exchange for permanent settlement rights and medical support. Dale raises the obvious concern. What if he says no? What if he doesn't want 18 additional people on his property? Shane's answer reflects the leadership philosophy that's kept their group alive for 8 weeks. Then we negotiate. We offer him enough value that saying no becomes more expensive than saying yes. We demonstrate our capabilities, show him what we can contribute to his operation. We make ourselves indispensable. Laurie adds her own perspective to Shane's tactical approach. And if negotiation doesn't work, we find another solution. But we don't raise this child in a temporary camp beside a quarry. We find or build something permanent. The discussion that follows reveals how much Shane's leadership has changed their group's fundamental approach to survival. Instead of hoping for rescue or temporary shelter, they're planning to establish permanent residence through demonstrated value and tactical necessity. Instead of asking for charity, they're negotiating from strength. Instead of drifting from location to location, they're choosing where to build their future and making the necessary arrangements to secure it. Andrea and Amy remain skeptical about the wisdom of bringing children into their world, but they don't oppose the practical planning that the pregnancy requires. Dale supports the green farm approach, while privately worrying about Shane's willingness to use force if negotiation fails. T-Dog and Glenn embrace the shift toward long-term thinking that the baby represents. Carol sees the pregnancy as validation of their group's stability and success under Shane's leadership. Most importantly, Carl accepts the baby as his sibling and Shane as his permanent father figure, completing the family structure that Rick's death made possible. That night, after the group has dispersed to their tents, Shane sits by the dying fire with his hand resting on Laurie's still flat stomach. The badge in his pocket carries new weight, not just the authority of leadership, but the responsibility of fatherhood in a world that doesn't forgive mistakes. "What do you think Rick would say about this?" Laurie asks quietly. Shane considers the question seriously. "I think Rick would be happy that you found someone to love, that Carl has a father figure, that our community is stable enough to support new life. But I think Rick would also worry about the risks, about bringing innocence into a world that punishes it. And what do you think?" Shane looks at the camp around them, the well-organized defensive positions, the carefully rationed supplies, the people sleeping safely in their tents because of decisions he's made over the past 8 weeks. "I think this baby is going to be born into the safest, most secure community we can build for it. I think it's going to learn from birth how to survive in this world instead of mourning the world that's gone. And I think it's going to have parents who've proven they can keep their family alive when everything else falls apart." Laurie leans against Shane's shoulder, and they sit together watching the stars that don't care about human plans or hopes or fears. "The baby will never know the world Rick grew up in," Laurie says after a long moment. "No," Shane agrees, "but it will know the world we're building, and that world includes everything good we can preserve from Rick's memory, while adding everything practical we've learned about survival since he died." The badge grows warm against Shane's chest, carrying the authority of the dead world and the responsibility of the living one. But tonight, it also carries something new. Hope for a future that includes new life shaped by Shane's leadership instead of Rick's idealism. Tomorrow there will be planning sessions about approaching Herschel Green, about medical requirements for pregnancy and delivery, about establishing permanent settlement instead of temporary survival. Tomorrow Shane will begin building the future his child will inherit, a future shaped by pragmatic leadership, tactical thinking, and the hard-earned knowledge that survival requires making choices Rick would never have made. Tonight, Shane sits with his family beside a fire that represents everything they've built together, everything they've survived together, everything they're planning to become together. The badge pulses with warmth in the darkness, carrying the weight of Rick's memory and the promise of Shane's future, worn by a man who's learned that sometimes the greatest honor you can pay to the dead is building something better for the living. Shane touches Laurie's stomach one more time, feeling for movement that won't come for months, then heads to his tent. His watch starts in an hour, and the people sleeping around him, including the child who doesn't exist yet but already depends on his decisions, are counting on him to keep the darkness away. The badge follows him into the darkness, warm with the authority of law in a lawless world, carried by a father who's learned that love sometimes looks like pragmatism, that protection sometimes requires hardness, and that building a future for your children sometimes means becoming someone your old friends wouldn't recognize. But the children sleep safely, and in Shane's world, that has to be enough. There's a stillness in the October air around their camp that feels different from the usual Georgia quiet, and Shane Walsh recognizes it as the kind of calm that comes before storms. Not weather, but the human kind that builds pressure until something breaks. The badge in his pocket has been growing warmer each day as walker activity increases around Atlanta, as their scouts report more signs of other survivor groups moving through the region, as the seasonal change pushes both the living and the dead toward more desperate behaviors. Shane stands at their newly constructed observation post, a platform built into the sturdy oak that overlooks the quarry's eastern approach, and studies the tactical improvements his group has implemented over the past 2 weeks. Where Rick's leadership might have focused on comfort and community building, Shane's approach has transformed their temporary camp into something approaching a forward operating base. The perimeter defenses tell the story of their evolution under his leadership. Instead of the loose arrangement of vehicles and tents that had marked their early days, Shane has organized their space with military precision. Vehicles positioned to create overlapping fields of fire, supply caches buried at strategic points around the camp, clear sight lines maintained between defensive positions. Most importantly, early warning systems that give them crucial minutes of preparation time when threats approach. Carol Pelletier has become Shane's most valuable tactical asset, though her transformation from frightened housewife to field commander would have been impossible in Rick's world. In Rick's timeline, Carol's evolution would have been gradual, shaped by loss and necessity over many months. In Shane's world, the pressure of constant threat assessment has compressed that development into weeks. "Movement on the North Ridge!" Carol's voice comes through the handheld radio Shane liberated from an abandoned police station. 3 walkers, moving parallel to our position, not directly approaching, but following some kind of scent trail. Shane responds immediately, his voice carrying the quiet authority that's become natural after 9 weeks of leadership. T-Dog and Andrea, take position at checkpoint 2. Glenn and Amy, maintain overwatch from the RV. Carol, continue tracking, but don't engage, unless they turn toward camp. The coordination that follows represents hundreds of hours of drill practice, the kind of tactical preparation Rick would have considered excessive or paranoid. Shane's people move to their assigned positions without discussion, without confusion, without the democratic debate that might have characterized decision-making under different leadership. Shane climbs down from the observation post and moves toward the central fire area where Laurie sits with Carl, both of them maintaining the appearance of normalcy while staying ready for rapid movement. This balance between domestic routine and tactical readiness has become the defining characteristic of their community under Shane's guidance. "How many walkers is that today?" Laurie asks quietly as Shane settles beside her. Shane consults his notebook, the careful record-keeping that tracks patterns and threats in their operational area. 17 confirmed sightings within 2 miles of camp, up from 12 yesterday, 8 the day before. The trend is accelerating. Carl looks up from the map he's been studying. Not a child's geography lesson, but tactical terrain analysis that Shane has been teaching him. At 8 years old, Carl can identify defensive positions, escape routes, and resource cache locations with the competence of someone twice his age. "Is it because of the weather getting colder?" Carl asks. "Are the walkers moving around more?" Shane considers the question seriously, giving Carl the kind of analytical response that builds tactical thinking, rather than dismissing childhood curiosity. Partly the weather, but mostly something else. When survivor groups move through an area, they disturb walker patterns. Someone's been moving through Atlanta in larger numbers than usual, stirring up activity that's spreading outward toward us. "Other people like Brian Foster's group?" Carl presses. "Possibly. Or people fleeing from Brian Foster's group. Or something bigger that's forced multiple groups to relocate simultaneously." Shane touches the badge in his pocket, feeling its weight increase with the implications. "That's why we've been preparing." The preparations Shane refers to represent a fundamental difference between his leadership philosophy and the approach Rick would have taken. Where Rick might have focused on building consensus and maintaining hope, Shane has invested their time and energy in becoming a more effective fighting unit. T-Dog emerges from beneath the hood of their primary escape vehicle, a military surplus truck Shane acquired during a supply run to an abandoned National Guard depot. The mechanical modifications T-Dog has implemented follow Shane's specifications: armor plating welded to protect the engine and fuel tank, gun ports cut into the passenger compartment, enough cargo space to evacuate their entire group with essential supplies. "How's the work coming?" Shane asks. T-Dog wipes grease from his hands with satisfaction. "We're good to go. This thing will punch through a herd if we need it to, carry all of us plus supplies for a week, and the engine's quieter than it was stock." He gestures towards the secondary vehicles. "Glenn's been working on the cars, too. Nothing as fancy as this, but they'll run fast and light if we need to split up." Shane nods approvingly. In Rick's world, this conversation might have been about fixing vehicles for comfort or reliability. In Shane's world, every mechanical decision serves tactical objectives. Glenn approaches from the vehicle maintenance area, carrying the kind of detailed report that Shane has trained his people to provide. Not casual updates, but precise intelligence that enables informed decision-making. "I've been monitoring radio traffic from Atlanta," Glenn reports. "Military frequencies, emergency services, even civilian channels. Most of it's dead air, but there's been some chatter in the last 48 hours. Shane accepts the written summary Glenn hands him, noting the careful documentation of frequencies, timestamps, and message content. This level of intelligence gathering would have been beyond their capabilities under Rick's more trusting leadership approach. "Someone's coordinating movement patterns," Glenn continues. "Groups checking in with each other, reporting clear routes and danger zones. It's organized in a way that suggests central planning." Laurie shifts uncomfortably. That could be good news, couldn't it? Organized survivor groups might mean the possibility of trade, cooperation, shared security. Shane reads through Glenn's report before answering. It could mean that. Or it could mean someone's building an army, consolidating smaller groups under centralized command for purposes we don't understand yet. Carl speaks up with the kind of tactical insight that would have been impossible in Rick's version of his childhood. If they're organized enough to coordinate radio communications, they're organized enough to plan attacks on unaffiliated groups. Shane feels a moment of pride watching Carl apply logical analysis to threat assessment. This is what leadership education looks like in a world where 8-year-old boys need to understand the difference between cooperation and conquest. Exactly right, Shane confirms, which is why we need to be prepared for contact, whether friendly or hostile. Amy joins their discussion group, returning from her assigned patrol of the southern perimeter. Her report reflects the kind of detailed observation skills Shane has developed in his people through weeks of training. No walker activity on the south approaches, but I found evidence of recent human passage, boot prints, disturbed vegetation, food wrapper that can't be more than 2 days old. Amy hands Shane a piece of trash she collected as evidence. Whoever it was, they were moving carefully. Deliberate noise discipline, minimal environmental impact. Andrea approaches from the radio monitoring station she's been maintaining since Shane implemented their communications security protocol. "I've been tracking the organized chatter Glenn mentioned. The groups are using code words for locations, but I think I've identified some of the landmarks they're referencing." Shane studies the map Andrea has marked, with suspected group positions and movement patterns. The tactical picture that emerges confirms his growing concern about increased activity in their operational area. "They're not random survivor groups," Shane concludes. This is coordinated reconnaissance, possibly advance scouting for a larger force. Dale emerges from his RV with the expression Shane has learned to recognize as philosophical disagreement, preparing to become practical objection. Before we start assuming hostile intent, Dale says carefully, shouldn't we consider the possibility that this organized group might be exactly what we've been hoping for? Government forces re-establishing control, military units providing security, some kind of legitimate authority that could offer real protection. Shane appreciates Dale's optimism, but 9 weeks of leadership has taught him to evaluate hope against evidence, rather than embracing it as policy. If they were legitimate government forces, they'd be broadcasting on official frequencies with standard identification protocols. If they were military units, their communications would follow established procedures that Glenn would recognize. Shane gestures toward the intelligence summary. This is organized, but it's not official, which means it's civilian groups operating with military-level coordination. And that's necessarily bad because, Dale prompts. Carl answers before Shane can respond, his 8-year-old voice carrying the authority of someone who's learned to think tactically about human nature. Because people who organize like military units without being military units usually want to control territory and resources that don't belong to them. They want to be the government instead of finding the government. Dale looks at Carl with something like sadness, recognizing how much childhood innocence has been sacrificed to develop this kind of analytical thinking. But he doesn't argue with Carl's logic, because 9 weeks of Shane's leadership has proven that tactical thinking keeps people alive more effectively than hopeful assumptions. That afternoon, Shane conducts combat drills with his entire group, not the basic self-defense training Rick might have implemented, but coordinated small unit tactics designed for fighting both walkers and human opponents simultaneously. The drill scenarios reflect the threats Shane considers most likely: coordinated assault by organized groups, walker herds driven toward their position by hostile forces, rapid evacuation under fire, defensive fighting from prepared positions. Laurie participates despite her pregnancy, taking communication and coordination roles that keep her away from direct combat while maintaining her integration with the group's tactical capabilities. Shane has learned that isolating pregnant women from group defense planning makes them vulnerable rather than protecting them. Carol has emerged as Shane's most capable field commander, displaying tactical intuition that would have remained undeveloped in Rick's more protective leadership environment. She coordinates the defense drills with professional competence, identifying weaknesses in their positioning and suggesting improvements to their procedures. If we're hit by walkers from multiple directions simultaneously, Carol observes during the post-drill analysis, our current fallback positions create bottlenecks that could trap us between threats. Shane studies the tactical problem Carol has identified. Recommendations? Secondary escape routes through the creek bed, pre-positioned equipment caches on the far side of the water, assigned rally points that don't depend on returning to camp. Carol's suggestions reflect the kind of contingency planning that separates amateur survival from professional preparation. Shane approves Carol's recommendations immediately, then assigns Glenn and T-Dog to implement them before nightfall. In Rick's world, this level of tactical preparation might have seemed excessive. In Shane's world, it represents prudent insurance against scenarios that could easily develop within hours. As the sun sets over their fortified camp, Shane climbs back up to his observation post for the final watch rotation of the day. The badge in his pocket carries the familiar weight of responsibility, but tonight it feels heavier than usual, loaded with the knowledge that their period of relative safety is ending. From the observation post, Shane can see the defensive improvements his group has implemented under his leadership. the coordinated patrol patterns that ensure constant surveillance of their perimeter, the communication protocols that enable rapid response to emerging threats, the tactical training that has transformed 18 survivors into an effective fighting unit. Most importantly, he can see people who've learned to function as a community without sacrificing individual capability, who've developed domestic routines that don't compromise tactical readiness, who've built something worth defending without becoming complacent about the defending. Laurie joins him on the platform as full darkness settles over the quarry, her presence both comforting and strategically sound. An extra set of eyes for surveillance, radio communication with the other watch positions, tactical backup if situations develop rapidly. "What do you think happens next?" Laurie asks quietly. Shane considers the question seriously, weighing the intelligence reports, the tactical indicators, the seasonal pressures that drive both living and dead toward more aggressive behavior. "I think we're going to make contact with that organized group sooner than we'd prefer. I think they're going to test our defensive capabilities and our willingness to defend this territory. And I think we're going to discover whether 9 weeks of preparation under my leadership has created a community strong enough to survive whatever's coming." Laurie rests her hand on her stomach, feeling for movement from the child who will inherit whatever world Shane's decisions create. And if we're not strong enough? Shane touches the badge in his pocket, feeling its weight settle into something permanent and final. Then we implement the evacuation protocols, fall back to secondary positions, and rebuild somewhere else. But we don't surrender. We don't negotiate from weakness, and we don't compromise the safety of our people for the comfort of strangers. The radio crackles with Carol's voice from the southern watch position. "Shane, I've got movement out here. Human figures, staying just outside visual range, but definitely observing our position." Shane keys his radio immediately. "Numbers and apparent intent? At least 3, possibly more. No direct approach, no obvious weapons, but they're conducting reconnaissance. Professional behavior patterns?" Shane considers the tactical implications. First contact with the organized group his people have been tracking. The moment when their 9 weeks of preparation gets tested by reality. All watch positions, maintain current posts, and report any additional activity. Do not initiate contact, but be ready for immediate escalation. Shane turns to Laurie. "Time to go." As they climb down from the observation post, Shane feels the badge pulse against his chest, carrying all the authority of Rick's memory and all the responsibility of Shane's reality, worn by a man who's learned that sometimes the greatest protection you can offer your family is the willingness to fight for the world you've built together. The storm Shane felt building in the October air is about to break, and his people are as ready for it as 9 weeks of tactical preparation can make them. Tomorrow there will be contact with unknown forces, tactical decisions under pressure, and the first real test of whether Shane's leadership philosophy can protect the life Laurie carries and the future they've all committed to building. Tonight, Shane makes his final rounds of their defensive positions, checking the readiness of people who've learned to sleep with weapons within reach, who've practiced coordination under stress, who've developed the kind of tactical discipline that keeps communities alive when everything else fails. The badge grows warm in the darkness, carrying the weight of choices made and challenges approaching, of preparation meeting reality, of a leader who's learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is become someone your old friends wouldn't recognize. But the people sleep safely tonight, and in Shane's world, that has to be enough. There's a sound at 2:43 a.m. that cuts through the Georgia night like a blade through silence, and Carol Pelletier recognizes it immediately from Shane's endless training sessions, the specific frequency of a walker herd moving through dense brush. Not the shambling gait of individual walkers, not the random encounters they've managed throughout the evening, but the coordinated movement of dozens of corpses following some scent or sound that's drawn them toward the quarry. Carol keys her radio with practiced precision, her voice carrying the calm authority that 9 weeks of Shane's leadership has developed in her. Command, this is Southwatch. I have movement signatures consistent with a large herd approaching from the Atlanta direction. Estimate 20 to 30 walkers, moving with apparent coordination. Shane's response comes immediately through the tactical radio network he's established throughout their defensive positions. Copy, Southwatch. All stations, implement alert condition. Red. This is not a drill. The transformation that follows represents hundreds of hours of preparation, the kind of tactical coordination that would have been impossible under Rick's more democratic leadership approach. Shane's people move to their assigned positions without confusion, without debate, without the precious minutes of discussion that could mean the difference between survival and catastrophe. In the command tent, Shane studies the tactical display board he's maintained since implementing their defensive protocols. A detailed map showing walker approach routes, defensive positions, fallback points, and evacuation procedures. The badge in his pocket pulses with weight as he processes Carol's intelligence report and calculates their response options. T-Dog Glenn, take positions Alpha and Bravo. Maintain noise discipline and wait for my command before engaging, Shane broadcasts through the radio network. Andrea and Amy, establish overwatch from the RV roof. Laurie, implement pregnancy protection protocol. Defensive position in the hardened shelter with Carl. Laurie moves toward their prepared safe position, a reinforced section of Dale's RV that Shane has modified specifically for protecting pregnant women and children during combat operations. But instead of the helpless isolation that might have characterized protection measures in Rick's world, Laurie carries tactical radio equipment and coordinates communication between defensive positions. Carl follows his assigned evacuation protocol, but his movement reflects the tactical training Shane has provided rather than childhood panic. At 8 years old, Carl can identify defensive positions, operate communication equipment, and execute emergency procedures with the competence of someone twice his age. The early warning systems Shane has implemented provide crucial minutes of preparation time that change the entire dynamic of the encounter. Instead of surprised survivors scrambling to respond to an unexpected attack, Shane's people implement practiced procedures from prepared positions with coordinated timing. Carol continues providing tactical intelligence from her observation post. Command, the herd appears to be following a specific scent trail. Movement is more directed than typical random wandering. They're being drawn by something specific. Shane processes this information and reaches a tactical conclusion that demonstrates the difference between his leadership philosophy and Rick's approach to crisis management. Instead of trying to quietly wait out the attack or hoping the walkers pass by without detecting them, Shane decides to engage proactively from positions of strength. All defensive positions, prepare for coordinated elimination sequence. We're going to break up this herd before it reaches our primary perimeter. The engagement that follows showcases 9 weeks of tactical preparation under Shane's guidance. T-Dog and Glenn coordinate overlapping fields of fire from prepared positions. Andrea and Amy provide precision targeting from elevated positions. Carol maintains reconnaissance and communication coordination. Most importantly, the group functions as an integrated tactical unit rather than a collection of individuals trying to protect themselves. The first phase of the engagement proceeds exactly according to Shane's training protocols. Coordinated fire eliminates the lead elements of the walker herd without alerting the trailing walkers to the presence of survivors. Tactical discipline maintains noise control that prevents the engagement from escalating beyond manageable parameters. but Shane's preparations account for the possibility that even perfect execution might encounter unexpected complications. The complication comes in the form of Jim, who breaks from his assigned defensive position to retrieve personal belongings from his tent instead of following evacuation procedures. In Rick's world, this kind of individual initiative might have been tolerated as understandable human behavior under stress. In Shane's world, it represents a tactical failure that endangers the entire group. Jim's deviation from procedure places him outside the coordinated defensive coverage when a secondary group of walkers approaches from an unexpected direction, apparently drawn by the sound of the initial engagement. Shane faces the kind of split-second leadership decision that defines the difference between his approach and Rick's. He can either redirect tactical resources to rescue Jim, potentially compromising the coordinated defense that's protecting 18 other people, or he can maintain tactical discipline and accept Jim's loss as the cost of his poor decision-making. Shane makes the choice that Rick would never have made. All positions, maintain current assignments. Do not break tactical discipline to assist individual evacuation failures. Jim's scream cuts through the night as walkers overwhelm his position. But Shane's people maintain their defensive coordination without wavering. The tactical discipline Shane has drilled into them prevents Jim's crisis from cascading into group catastrophe. T-Dog keys his radio with obvious strain in his voice. "Command, Jim is down. I can reach him if I abandon my position." Shane's response carries the weight of leadership decisions that prioritize group survival over individual rescue. Negative. Maintain your position. Jim made his choice when he broke procedure. The moral cost of Shane's tactical discipline becomes evident as Jim's cries for help echo across their defensive positions, while Shane's people maintain the coordination that keeps the rest of them alive. This is the kind of choice Rick would have struggled with, the kind of decision that might have paralyzed Rick's more humanitarian leadership approach. Shane experiences no paralysis. The badge in his pocket carries the authority of practical leadership in a world that punishes hesitation. Amy's survival represents the clearest difference between Shane's timeline and the canonical outcome of this attack. In Rick's world, Amy would have died during the chaotic, uncoordinated response to unexpected walker assault. In Shane's world, Amy survives because she's in an assigned defensive position with coordinated fire support when the attack begins. "South perimeter is clear," Amy reports from her Overwatch position. "I count 15 walker eliminations, no breaches of our primary defensive line." Andrea's voice follows immediately through the radio network. "North perimeter secure. 8 eliminations. Jim's position compromised but contained. No other casualties." The tactical success of Shane's defensive preparations becomes undeniable as his people report coordinated elimination of the walker threat without losing control of their perimeter. But the moral cost of that success weighs differently than it would have in Rick's world. Shane implements the final phase of his tactical protocol, evacuation to secondary positions that prevent reoccupation of a compromised location by follow-up threats. All positions, initiate fallback to Bravo site. Standard evacuation procedures, equipment cache priority alpha. The evacuation that follows demonstrates the logistical preparation Shane has invested in survival planning that extends beyond immediate tactical response. Pre-positioned equipment caches, assigned vehicle assignments, coordinated movement to prepared secondary positions. Most importantly, the group maintains tactical cohesion during evacuation instead of dissolving into individual survival behavior. The secondary camp location Shane has prepared represents strategic thinking that Rick would never have considered necessary. Located 2 miles from their primary position, equipped with basic defensive improvements, supplied with enough cached resources to sustain the group for 72 hours while they assess threats and plan their next movement. As Shane's people establish security at the Bravo site, Jim's fate becomes the defining moral decision of the crisis. Jim survived the initial Walker attack, but sustained bite injuries that guarantee his conversion within hours. In Rick's world, this would have led to lengthy discussions about mercy, hope, and the possibility of medical intervention. In Shane's world, the decision matrix is more straightforward. Jim's been bitten, T-Dog reports as they establish perimeter security at the secondary location. Upper arm, deep penetration, classic infection vector. Shane examines Jim's injuries with tactical assessment rather than emotional attachment. The medical reality is undeniable. Jim will turn within hours, becoming a threat to group security in a location they haven't fully secured yet. Dale advocates for the kind of compassionate response that Rick would have supported. We could restrain him, keep him comfortable, give him time to say goodbye to people. Carol offers a different perspective, shaped by her development under Shane's leadership. Jim broke tactical discipline and put the entire group at risk. His conversion in an unsecured location continues that risk. Carl speaks up with the kind of practical analysis that would have been impossible in Rick's version of his childhood. If Jim turns while we're still getting organized here, we'll have to fight a walker inside our defensive perimeter while we're trying to establish security. Shane looks at the 8-year-old boy who's learned to think tactically about life and death, feeling pride and sadness in equal measure. This is what childhood looks like in Shane's world. Competent, realistic, unencumbered by the kind of moral idealism that Rick would have tried to preserve. The decision Shane makes about Jim represents the culmination of his leadership philosophy and the fundamental difference between his world and Rick's. Jim, you've got two choices. You can walk away from this group right now, under your own power, with enough supplies to make your final hours comfortable. Or you can stay and be put down when you turn, because I won't risk my people fighting a walker inside our perimeter. Jim's response carries the dignity of someone who understands the tactical reality of his situation. I'll walk. Give me a gun with one bullet and enough water for tonight. I'll handle this myself. The farewell that follows is brief and matter-of-fact, shaped by Shane's leadership culture rather than the extended emotional processing that Rick might have encouraged. Jim shakes hands with his companions, accepts his supplies, and walks into the darkness under his own power. Shane watches Jim disappear into the tree line and feels the badge pulse against his chest, carrying all the weight of decisions that keep most people alive by accepting that some people can't be saved. 3 hours later, a single gunshot echoes from the woods in the direction Jim walked. Shane's people register the sound without comment, understanding its meaning without requiring explanation. Contact eliminated, T-Dog observes quietly. 1 KIA due to tactical indiscipline. 17 survivors evacuated successfully to secondary positions, Shane records in his leadership log. As dawn breaks over their temporary position, Shane assembles his people for the tactical assessment that will determine their next movements. The group that gathers around his makeshift command post represents a fundamentally different organization than the one Rick would have led through this crisis. More disciplined, more tactically competent, more willing to accept hard choices as necessary costs of group survival, but also harder, less idealistic, shaped by leadership that prioritizes effective outcomes over comfortable processes. Assessment. Shane addresses his people with the authority of someone whose preparations just proved their value under combat conditions. We successfully defended against a coordinated walker attack with minimal casualties. Our tactical preparations worked exactly as designed. Andrea nods from her position, monitoring the perimeter. Jim's loss was preventable if he'd followed evacuation procedures. Amy adds her perspective from the communications station. The early warning systems gave us the tactical advantage we needed to control the engagement. Carl offers his analysis with the seriousness Shane has encouraged in him. Our preparation and training meant the difference between controlling the situation and being controlled by it. Shane looks around at his people, alive, organized, ready to continue building the future they've committed to protecting together. The cost of their survival weighs on him, but it doesn't paralyze him the way similar costs might have affected Rick's leadership. "We're going to continue toward Herschel's farm," Shane announces. "This location is compromised, but our tactical capabilities are proven. We approach Herschel from a position of demonstrated strength." Laurie touches her stomach, feeling for movement from the child who will inherit the world Shane's decisions have created. "What about Jim?" Shane touches the badge in his pocket, feeling its weight settle into something permanent and final. Jim made his choice when he broke tactical discipline. The consequences of that choice are his responsibility, not ours. Dale shifts uncomfortably, still struggling with the moral implications of abandoning group members who make poor decisions under stress. But Dale doesn't argue, because Shane's approach just saved 17 lives through tactical preparation and leadership discipline. The evacuation to Bravo site continues according to Shane's protocols, with assigned responsibilities and coordinated timing that prevents the chaos that might have characterized group movement under different leadership. As Shane's people break camp and prepare for movement toward their long-term objective, Carol approaches him with the kind of tactical assessment that's become natural under his leadership. The organized group that was conducting reconnaissance yesterday is probably aware of the Walker attack and our tactical response. Our defensive capabilities are no longer secret. Shane considers Carol's observation and its strategic implications. Good. When we approach Herschel's farm, we approach as a proven tactical unit rather than refugees begging for shelter. Strength negotiates better than weakness. The convoy that forms for their movement toward Herschel's property represents 9 weeks of tactical preparation under Shane's guidance. Coordinated vehicle assignments, communication protocols, security procedures, and logistical support that enables rapid movement without compromising defensive capabilities. Most importantly, it represents a group that's learned to function as an integrated unit rather than a collection of individuals trying to survive independently. Shane takes his position in the lead vehicle, radio communication with all other positions, tactical overview of their movement formation. The badge in his pocket carries the weight of Rick's memory and the authority of Shane's reality, worn by a leader who's learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is become someone your old friends wouldn't recognize. Behind him, 16 people, plus Laurie's unborn child, move toward their future in vehicles prepared for combat, with tactical training that's proven effective under pressure, guided by leadership that prioritizes practical outcomes over comfortable idealism. Jim's sacrifice echoes in the sound of their engines, a reminder that survival sometimes requires accepting losses that more idealistic leadership might have tried to prevent. But the people who remain are alive because Shane made the hard choices, maintained tactical discipline, and refused to let individual failures compromise group survival. The badge grows warm against Shane's chest as their convoy moves toward Herschel's farm, and the next phase of building something permanent in a world that punishes those who aren't prepared to fight for what they've built. Tomorrow there will be negotiations with Herschel Green, the establishment of permanent settlement, and the continued development of tactical capabilities that enable long-term survival. Tonight, Shane leads his people toward their future with the knowledge that his leadership philosophy has been tested under combat conditions and proven effective. The cost of that effectiveness weighs on the badge in his pocket, but it doesn't diminish his authority or his commitment to the people who've chosen to follow him into whatever comes next. 17 survivors plus 1 unborn child moving toward their future in a convoy organized by leadership that's learned the difference between the world Rick wanted to preserve and the world Shane has built to replace it. There's a tension in the morning air at Bravo site that has nothing to do with walkers or hostile survivors, and Shane Walsh recognizes it as the kind of pressure that builds when people who've learned to follow orders start questioning the wisdom of those orders. The badge in his pocket carries different weight this morning, not just the authority of tactical leadership proven under fire, but the burden of strategic decisions that will determine whether his 17 people survive the winter. The debate begins during their tactical assessment meeting, when Dale raises the question Shane has been hoping to avoid. The CDC, Dale says carefully, studying the map spread across their improvised command table. We've talked about Herschel's farm for long-term settlement, but Laurie's pregnancy changes our immediate priorities. She needs medical facilities, proper prenatal care, potentially surgical capability for delivery complications. Shane looks up from the intelligence reports Glenn has compiled about rural locations within tactical movement range. The CDC is in Atlanta. Atlanta is compromised territory with increasing walker populations and organized hostile groups conducting operations in the area. Laurie shifts uncomfortably from her position, monitoring their perimeter radio, her hand resting on her stomach. Dale's right about the medical concerns. I'm 12 weeks along now, and we don't know what complications might develop. A veterinarian at Herschel's farm isn't the same as actual medical infrastructure. Shane feels the familiar weight of leadership decisions that have no clear right answer, where every choice carries costs that someone else will bear. In Rick's world, this would have been a group discussion with consensus building and majority vote. In Shane's world, strategic decisions require strategic thinking rather than democratic sentiment. Medical infrastructure doesn't help us if we're dead, Shane says bluntly. The CDC might have facilities, but it's also a target for every desperate group in the region. Government buildings attract attention from people who still believe in government solutions. Carol approaches from her assigned watch position, carrying the kind of tactical intelligence that's become standard under Shane's leadership. I've been monitoring radio traffic from Atlanta direction. Increased chatter, more coordination between groups, references to supply concentrations that suggest organized scavenging of institutional locations. Shane studies Carol's intelligence report, noting patterns that confirm his strategic concerns about high-profile targets in urban areas. The CDC is exactly the kind of location that organized groups would prioritize for resource extraction. Medical equipment, pharmaceuticals, research materials, everything desperate people fight each other to control. T-Dog joins the discussion from the vehicle maintenance area, carrying tools that reflect their continued mobility requirements under Shane's strategic planning. Engines are ready for whatever we decide, but the longer we sit in this temporary position, the more vulnerable we become to organized tracking. Shane appreciates T-Dog's tactical awareness, the understanding that temporary defensive positions become liability when extended beyond their intended duration. This is what 9 weeks of leadership education creates. People who think strategically about group security rather than just individual comfort. But Dale presses his medical advocacy with the kind of moral authority that Shane has learned to respect, even when disagreeing with its practical conclusions. Shane, I understand the security concerns, but some risks are worth taking when the stakes are high enough. Laurie's pregnancy isn't just about one person. It's about the future we're all trying to build together. That future needs medical infrastructure. Glenn looks up from his map analysis with the expression Shane has learned to recognize as tactical disagreement, preparing to become strategic objection. I agree with Dale about the medical priorities, Glenn says carefully. But I also think we're approaching this as an either-or decision when it might be more effective to split our approach. Some of us scout the CDC for medical resources, while others evaluate rural settlement options. Shane considers Glenn's proposal, weighing tactical flexibility against command unity. In Rick's world, splitting the group would have required extensive consensus building and safety protocols. In Shane's world, it represents an operational decision based on mission requirements and resource allocation. Splitting our tactical strength makes both groups more vulnerable, Shane observes, but it also allows parallel intelligence gathering on multiple strategic options. Andrea supports Glenn's splitting approach from her position, coordinating their communication protocols. We've proven our tactical capabilities under pressure. Two smaller groups might actually be harder to track and target than one large convoy. Amy adds her perspective from the supply management station. And if one group encounters problems, the other group maintains operational capability instead of losing everyone to a single bad decision. Shane studies the faces around their command table, noting the careful way his people present their strategic disagreements. This isn't mutiny or democratic rebellion. It's tactical discussion between competent people who've learned to think strategically about group survival, the kind of strategic thinking that Rick's more protective leadership might never have developed in them. Operational parameters, Shane says, accepting the splitting proposal while establishing command authority over its implementation. Glenn takes 4 people to evaluate CDC medical infrastructure. I take 4 people to evaluate rural settlement options. 7 people remain here to maintain base security and tactical coordination. Laurie immediately volunteers for Glenn's CDC mission, citing her direct medical interest in the outcome. Dale supports her assignment, arguing that pregnancy complications require immediate rather than theoretical medical evaluation. Shane overrides both recommendations with the kind of strategic thinking that separates tactical leadership from emotional decision-making. Laurie remains at base site with tactical communication responsibility. Pregnancy doesn't travel into high-risk reconnaissance operations. Shane's tone carries final authority. Dale, Andrea, T-Dog, and Amy with Glenn for CDC evaluation. Carl, Carol, and Laurie maintain base security with me for rural reconnaissance. The assignments Shane makes reflect strategic thinking rather than personal preferences or group harmony. Glenn's team combines mechanical capability, medical knowledge, tactical competence, and communication skills for urban operations. Shane's team combines leadership, security, local knowledge, and family protection for rural evaluation. Most importantly, both teams maintain tactical capabilities that enable independent operation if coordination becomes impossible. The split that follows operates according to protocols Shane has established for exactly this kind of distributed operation. Assigned communication schedules, predetermined rally points, tactical objectives with defined success criteria. Glenn's team departs for Atlanta in their most reliable vehicle, equipped with communication equipment and tactical supplies for 48-hour independent operation. Their mission parameters focus on medical infrastructure assessment, security evaluation, and resource inventory without engaging hostile forces or compromising group operational security. Shane's team prepares for rural reconnaissance toward the farmland north of Atlanta, evaluating potential settlement locations that offer defensive advantages, sustainable resources, and distance from organized hostile activity. Before departing, Shane conducts private tactical briefing with Carol, whose evolution under his leadership has made her his most reliable field lieutenant. If we encounter hostile survivors during rural reconnaissance, our priority is intelligence gathering rather than tactical engagement, Shane explains. We need to understand threat patterns in areas we might want to settle. Carol nods with the tactical awareness Shane has developed in her. Rules of engagement: avoid contact if possible, withdraw if discovered, engage only for defensive purposes if withdrawal becomes impossible. Shane touches the badge in his pocket, feeling its weight increase with the responsibility of leading people into potentially hostile territory. Our objective is information, not conquest. Carl prepares for his first major reconnaissance operation with the seriousness Shane has taught him to bring to all tactical activities. At 8 years old, Carl can read maps, operate communication equipment, and maintain situational awareness with competence that would have been impossible in Rick's version of his childhood. What if we find people who want to hurt us? Carl asks during his tactical briefing. Shane gives Carl the honest answer that Rick would have complicated with moral philosophy and hope for human goodness. Then we learn everything we can about their capabilities and intentions, and we use that information to protect our family. Sometimes the best way to avoid fighting people is to understand them well enough to stay away from them. Carl accepts this wisdom with the practical thinking Shane has encouraged in him. Like studying walkers to know how they move and what attracts them. Exactly like that, Shane confirms. People can be more dangerous than walkers because people can plan and coordinate. But people also have patterns and weaknesses that we can learn to predict. The rural reconnaissance that Shane's team conducts reveals both opportunities and threats that will influence their strategic planning for weeks ahead. Potential settlement locations include several abandoned farms with defensible positions, sustainable water sources, and agricultural potential, properties that could support long-term community development under proper security management. But Shane's team also encounters evidence of organized hostile activity that confirms his strategic concerns about human threats in their operational area. Signs of recent raids on isolated homesteads, vehicle tracks suggesting coordinated movement by multiple groups, radio traffic indicating communication between hostile elements planning resource extraction operations. Most significantly, direct contact with a hostile patrol that validates Shane's tactical preparations and strategic skepticism about human nature in collapsed society. The encounter occurs during Shane's evaluation of a farmstead that appears ideal for defensive settlement: elevated position, multiple escape routes, sustainable resources, distance from major population centers. Shane's team is conducting systematic reconnaissance when Carol identifies approaching vehicles through her binoculars. Command: I have 2 trucks approaching our position from the east. 6 to 8 individuals, armed, moving with tactical coordination that suggests military or law enforcement background. Shane immediately implements contact protocols, positioning his people for observation and defensive engagement while avoiding premature escalation. The hostile group's approach confirms Shane's strategic assessment of human threats in the post-collapse environment. Instead of attempting communication or offering assistance, they immediately begin tactical evaluation of Shane's team as potential targets. They're surrounding our position, Carol reports through their tactical radio network. Professional movement patterns, coordinated timing, obvious intent to eliminate or capture rather than communicate. Shane makes the strategic decision that defines the difference between his leadership and Rick's approach to human contact. Instead of attempting diplomatic resolution or hoping for peaceful intentions, Shane coordinates tactical withdrawal that prioritizes intelligence gathering over moral idealism. All positions, implement extraction protocol Bravo. We're gathering intelligence on hostile capabilities, not testing their willingness to negotiate. The tactical withdrawal that follows demonstrates 9 weeks of preparation under Shane's leadership. Coordinated movement, communication discipline, tactical flexibility that enables intelligence collection during contact without compromising group security. Shane's team escapes hostile contact with valuable intelligence about organized threats in their operational area, but also with confirmation that his strategic skepticism about human nature has been validated by experience. Professional coordination, military-style equipment, and immediate hostile intent toward unaffiliated survivors, Shane records in his tactical log during their return journey to base site. Rural areas are not necessarily safer than urban areas when organized groups are conducting territorial expansion. Meanwhile, Glenn's team discovers that the CDC represents both opportunity and liability in ways that will influence their strategic planning. The CDC facility is intact but abandoned, with functional research equipment and substantial pharmaceutical supplies, medical infrastructure that could support Laurie's pregnancy and delivery under proper security management. But the facility also shows evidence of recent visitation by multiple groups, some of whom left tactical markers suggesting ongoing territorial interest in the location. It's exactly what we need medically, Dale reports through their scheduled communication check. But it's also exactly what every organized group in the region wants to control strategically. Glenn adds tactical assessment that mirrors Shane's rural reconnaissance findings. We've identified at least 3 different groups that have conducted operations here in the past week. The medical resources are significant, but the security requirements for holding this location would exceed our current tactical capabilities. The intelligence both teams gather creates the strategic dilemma that will define their next phase of survival planning. Medical resources exist at the CDC, but controlling them requires tactical capabilities they don't possess. Rural settlement locations offer defensive advantages, but organized hostile groups are actively expanding into those areas. Urban resources provide immediate supply opportunities, but attract dangerous competition from multiple survivor factions. When both teams reunite at base site, Shane faces the kind of strategic decision that separates leadership from management, tactical thinking from wishful planning. Assessment. Shane addresses his reunited people with the authority of someone whose reconnaissance has provided intelligence rather than easy answers. Both strategic options offer advantages and disadvantages that require careful evaluation. Laurie speaks first about the medical findings. The CDC has everything we need for prenatal care and delivery, but Glenn's right about the security requirements. Holding that position would require more people and resources than we have. Carol offers tactical assessment from the rural reconnaissance. Isolated farmsteads provide defensive advantages, but organized hostile groups are expanding into rural areas with coordination that makes individual settlements vulnerable. Dale adds his perspective on the fundamental strategic question they're facing. We need to decide whether we're trying to find the safest place to hide or trying to build something strong enough to defend what we need. Shane looks around at his people. 17 survivors, plus Laurie's unborn child, equipped with tactical capabilities proven under pressure, led by his strategic thinking rather than democratic sentiment. The badge in his pocket carries the weight of Rick's memory and the authority of Shane's reality, worn by a leader who's learned that sometimes the most important decisions are the ones that acknowledge unpleasant truths about the world they're actually living in. We're not hiding, Shane says, with final authority. We're building something strong enough to take and hold what our family needs to survive. The question isn't where we can be safe. The question is where we can be strongest. The strategic planning that follows will determine whether Shane's leadership can navigate the gap between what his people need and what the world is willing to give them without a fight. But tonight, Shane sits with his reunited people beside a fire that represents everything they've learned about survival under his leadership, everything they've proven about their tactical capabilities, everything they're prepared to build together in a world that rewards strength over righteousness. The badge grows warm against his chest, carrying the authority of the dead world and the responsibility of the living one, worn by a father who's learned that sometimes the greatest protection you can offer your family is the willingness to take from others what they refuse to share willingly. Tomorrow they'll begin planning their approach to either the CDC or rural settlement, armed with intelligence rather than hope, guided by strategic thinking rather than moral idealism. Tonight, Shane leads 17 people who've learned the difference between the world Rick wanted to preserve and the world Shane has taught them to conquer. There's a moment when the CDC's blast doors open to reveal Dr. Edwin Jenner that Shane Walsh understands the fundamental difference between his approach to survival and the approach Rick would have taken, where Rick would have seen a potential ally, a representative of scientific authority worth earning trust from. Shane sees a resource to be evaluated and exploited. The badge in his pocket pulses with weight as he studies Jenner's defensive posture, noting the man's obvious paranoia and calculating how to leverage it. Jenner stands in the CDC's main corridor, with a shotgun held at ready position, his eyes moving between Shane's 17 people with the hypervigilant assessment of someone who's learned not to trust anyone. 10 weeks of isolation in a government facility has taught Jenner that other people represent the primary threat to his continued survival. "That's close enough," Jenner calls out, when Shane's group reaches the inner security checkpoint. "State your business and keep your weapons visible. I've got automated defense systems that respond to aggressive movement." Shane raises his hands in a gesture that appears compliant, while actually positioning himself for tactical advantage if negotiations deteriorate. 9 weeks of leadership has taught him to prepare for violence while appearing to seek cooperation. "We're looking for medical assistance," Shane says, his voice carrying authoritative calm rather than desperate pleading. "Pregnant woman in our group needs prenatal evaluation, possibly delivery support in the coming months." Jenner's eyes move to Laurie, noting her condition while maintaining tactical awareness of the armed group surrounding her. "Medical assistance requires trust. Trust requires verification of peaceful intent. Lower your weapons and submit to security procedures." In Rick's world, this would have been the beginning of diplomatic relationship building, with both parties working toward mutual understanding and shared benefit. In Shane's world, it's the opening phase of a negotiation where strength determines outcomes. "Counter-proposal," Shane responds without lowering his weapon. "You provide the medical evaluation my people need, plus access to pharmaceutical supplies and research facilities, and we provide security services that keep this location defended against the organized groups conducting operations in this area." Shane's approach immediately reframes the interaction from charity request to business negotiation, establishing his group's value proposition rather than appealing to Jenner's humanitarian impulses. Jenner shifts uncomfortably, recognizing the implicit threat in Shane's offer. "This is a research facility, not a trading post. I'm conducting critical work on viral analysis that requires sterile conditions and uninterrupted focus." Carol steps forward with the tactical intelligence she's gathered about CDC operations during their reconnaissance. "Dr. Jenner, our monitoring of local radio traffic indicates multiple organized groups planning resource extraction operations, targeting government facilities. Your research is important, but it won't continue if hostile forces overrun your position. The intelligence Carroll provides represents Shane's strategic approach to negotiation, using superior information gathering to demonstrate value while highlighting vulnerability. Instead of appealing to Jenna's better nature, Shane's people present logical arguments based on tactical reality. T-Dog adds his mechanical assessment to the negotiation framework. Your facility's power systems and defensive equipment require maintenance expertise. Our group includes people with relevant technical capabilities. Andrea contributes communication intelligence that reinforces their value proposition. We've monitored coordinated traffic indicating systematic targeting of institutional locations for medical and technical resources. The CDC is definitely on somebody's priority list. Shane watches Jenna process this information, noting the scientist's obvious concern about external threats he may not have fully considered during his isolation. "What exactly are you proposing?" Jenna asks, his defensive posture shifting slightly toward negotiation readiness. Shane presents his terms with the matter-of-fact authority that's characterized his leadership for 9 weeks. Mutual benefit arrangement. You provide medical support for our people, access to pharmaceutical supplies, and research briefing on viral characteristics. We provide perimeter security, technical maintenance support, and intelligence about external threats. Research briefing? Jenna's scientific curiosity conflicts with his security paranoia. What makes you think you're qualified to understand viral research? Carl steps forward with the confident analysis Shane has taught him to bring to all technical discussions. We don't need to understand the research. We need to understand what the research tells us about survival requirements, infection vectors, and long-term prognosis for community planning. Shane feels pride watching Carl apply tactical thinking to scientific information gathering. This is what leadership education produces. People who can extract practical value from specialized knowledge without requiring specialized expertise. Jenna studies Carl with surprise, apparently not expecting tactical sophistication from an 8-year-old child. Long-term community planning assumes there's a long-term future worth planning for. That's what we're trying to determine, Shane says. Information enables planning. Planning enables survival. Survival enables the future we're building for our children. The negotiation that follows demonstrates the fundamental difference between Shane's approach and Rick's more diplomatic methodology. Where Rick would have tried to earn Jenna's trust through demonstration of good character, Shane leverages practical necessity to compel cooperation. Dale attempts to introduce humanitarian considerations into the tactical negotiation. Dr. Jenna, we're not trying to exploit your situation. We're hoping to find mutually beneficial cooperation that helps everyone involved. Shane doesn't contradict Dale's appeal to shared humanity, but he reinforces it with practical considerations that matter more to someone who's learned to distrust altruistic motivation. Dr. Jenna, you've been alone here for 10 weeks. Isolation compromises judgment, reduces operational security awareness, and limits your ability to assess external threats accurately. Our group provides strategic intelligence and tactical capabilities you need, whether you realize it or not. Jenna's resistance begins eroding under the combined pressure of logical argument, practical necessity, and implicit threat that Shane's approach creates. Not violence exactly, but clear understanding that cooperation serves Jenna's interests better than continued isolation. Fine, Jenna says eventually. Limited access for medical evaluation and basic pharmaceutical supplies. But I maintain control of research facilities and classified information. Shane accepts these terms while establishing parameters that extend his group's access beyond Jenna's initial limitations. Agreed. Medical evaluation includes full prenatal assessment, delivery preparation, and infant care capabilities. Pharmaceutical access includes antibiotics, pain management, and emergency medical supplies. Laurie undergoes the kind of comprehensive medical evaluation that would have been impossible at Herschel's farm or in their field conditions. Jenna's examination reveals pregnancy complications that require ongoing monitoring, not dangerous yet, but requiring professional medical attention that confirms the wisdom of seeking CDC resources. Blood pressure elevation, early signs of gestational complications that could develop into serious problems, Jenna explains to Shane and Laurie during the medical briefing. Manageable with proper monitoring and pharmaceutical intervention, but requiring medical infrastructure you wouldn't have in field conditions. The medical intelligence Jenna provides validates Shane's strategic decision to pursue CDC resources despite security risks. Laurie's pregnancy requires capabilities that only institutional medical facilities can provide. But the most significant intelligence Jenna shares comes during the research briefing Shane demands as part of their negotiation. Global saturation, airborne transmission, dormant infection in 100% of the living population, Jenna explains with the clinical detachment of someone who's had 10 weeks to process apocalyptic information. Death reactivates the virus regardless of cause. Everyone who dies becomes infected. Everyone. The implications of this intelligence reshape every aspect of Shane's strategic planning for their community's future. Not just avoiding bites, not just clearing local walker populations, but accepting that death itself creates ongoing threat that requires permanent tactical vigilance. Carl processes this information with the practical analysis Shane has taught him to apply to all survival intelligence. So everyone who dies in our community becomes a threat to everyone else who's still alive. Exactly, Shane confirms, which means our security planning has to account for natural death, accidents, and medical complications as potential combat situations. Glenn raises the obvious question about long-term community sustainability. If everyone who dies becomes a walker, what happens to communities over years or decades? How do we build something permanent when death is constantly generating new threats? Jenna's answer carries the weight of scientific analysis, uncomplicated by hope or sentiment. Communities that survive long-term will be communities that develop protocols for managing member death as a security procedure, rather than a grieving ritual. Permanent vigilance, immediate response capabilities, and tactical procedures for eliminating conversion threats. The strategic planning implications force Shane to reconsider every aspect of their community development beyond immediate survival needs. Building something permanent requires infrastructure that accounts for the fact that their own people will eventually become threats that must be eliminated efficiently. Dale struggles with the moral implications of Jenna's intelligence about permanent infection. Are you saying there's no hope for treatment, cure, or eventual recovery of normal society? I'm saying the condition that created this collapse is permanent, Jenna responds. Whatever society emerges from this will be fundamentally different from what existed before, because the basic parameters of human mortality have changed permanently. Shane processes this intelligence through the tactical framework he's used for 9 weeks of leadership decisions. No rescue coming, no government restoration, no return to the world Rick grew up in, or the world Rick would have tried to preserve. Only the world Shane builds, shaped by the realities Jenna's research confirms, rather than the hopes Rick's idealism would have maintained. Pharmaceutical extraction, Shane announces after processing Jenna's intelligence. We take everything our group needs for long-term medical support, plus surplus supplies for trade value with other communities. This isn't a supply depot, Jenna objects. These are research materials for ongoing scientific work. Shane's response demonstrates the leadership philosophy that's kept his people alive for 9 weeks, while other groups have dissolved or been destroyed. Your research is valuable, but our survival is essential. We take what we need, and you continue your work with whatever remains. Mutual benefit, not mutual sacrifice. The pharmaceutical extraction that follows represents Shane's approach to resource acquisition. Systematic, efficient, oriented toward long-term strategic advantage rather than immediate consumption. Antibiotics, pain medications, surgical supplies, prenatal vitamins, emergency medical equipment. Everything required to support Laurie's pregnancy, manage medical emergencies, and maintain community health without depending on external medical infrastructure. T-Dog coordinates the technical evaluation of CDC communications and security equipment that might provide tactical advantages for their permanent settlement planning, emergency radio systems, surveillance equipment, power generation capabilities. Andrea documents Jenna's research findings that relate to community planning and long-term survival strategy. Not the scientific details, but the practical implications for security procedures, resource management, and population sustainability. Most importantly, Shane's people gather intelligence rather than just supplies, information that will influence their strategic planning for months ahead. Establishment of permanent base operations, Shane announces as his people complete their resource extraction. CDC provides tactical advantages for secure settlement while we develop long-term community infrastructure. Jenna objects with increasing desperation as he realizes Shane's group intends occupation rather than temporary assistance. This is a research facility, not a refugee camp. I have work to complete that requires controlled conditions. Shane's response reflects the leadership philosophy that prioritizes his people's needs over external considerations or humanitarian sentiment. Dr. Jenna, your research continues under our protection, or it doesn't continue at all when organized hostile groups overrun this location. Your choice is cooperation or abandonment, not cooperation or independence. The occupation that follows demonstrates Shane's strategic thinking about resource control and territorial defense. Instead of seeking temporary shelter or requesting ongoing assistance, Shane's group takes control of infrastructure they need while providing security services that justify their occupation. Guard rotations coordinated with CDC security systems, technical maintenance performed by T-Dog and Glenn, communication monitoring managed by Andrea and Carol, perimeter defense established according to Shane's tactical protocols. Most importantly, Shane's group functions as an integrated tactical unit that enhances rather than compromises CDC security capabilities. Mutual benefit achieved through strength rather than charity, Shane records in his leadership log that evening. CDC provides medical infrastructure and research intelligence. We provide security and maintenance capabilities that enable continued operations. Jenna adapts to the occupation with the reluctant cooperation of someone who recognizes that resistance would be both futile and counterproductive. Shane's people provide capabilities he genuinely needs. Even though the arrangement gives them control, he's uncomfortable surrendering. That night, as Shane's people establish their first secure base operations since leaving the quarry, Laurie approaches Shane with the kind of strategic question that defines their community's future planning. "How long do we stay here?" she asks. "This is ideal for medical support during pregnancy and delivery. but we can't raise children permanently in a government facility. Shane touches the badge in his pocket, feeling its weight settle into plans that extend beyond immediate survival toward multi-generational community development. Through your delivery and initial recovery period, long enough to establish tactical superiority over organized threats in this region, long enough to identify and prepare permanent settlement location with the resources and intelligence we gather here. And then? Then we build something permanent that incorporates everything we've learned about security, medical support, resource management, and community sustainability. Shane looks around at the CDC facility that represents both opportunity and temporary solution. We use this place to build the capability to take and hold whatever location offers the best long-term advantages for our children. Laurie rests her hand on her stomach, feeling for movement from the child who will inherit whatever world Shane's decisions create. What about Dr. Jenner? What happens to him when we leave? Shane considers the question through the tactical framework that's guided his leadership for 9 weeks. Dr. Jenner comes with us if his capabilities serve our community's needs. He stays here if his research serves his own purposes. He makes his own choices based on his own priorities. The badge grows warm against Shane's chest as he considers the strategic advantages his group has gained through occupation of the CDC. Medical infrastructure for Laurie's delivery, research intelligence about long-term survival parameters, pharmaceutical supplies for extended operations, technical equipment for enhanced communications and security. Most importantly, proof that Shane's approach to resource acquisition through strength rather than charity produces superior outcomes for his people's survival and community development. Tomorrow there will be continued security operations, enhanced medical monitoring for Laurie, and strategic planning for permanent settlement that incorporates everything they've learned about the world. Jenner's research confirms they're building for their children. Tonight, Shane leads 17 people who've learned the difference between asking for help and taking what they need, between hoping for rescue and building something strong enough to defend itself, between Rick's idealistic approach to human cooperation and Shane's practical approach to resource control. The badge pulses with warmth in the darkness, carrying the authority of the dead world and the responsibility of the living one, worn by a leader who's learned that sometimes the greatest protection you can offer your family is the willingness to take from others what they possess and you require. 17 survivors plus 1 unborn child, sleeping securely in a facility they control through strength rather than charity, guided by leadership that's proven tactical effectiveness, produces better outcomes than moral idealism in a world that rewards capability over character. There's a moment when Shane Walsh first sees Herschel Green's farm that he recognizes not as potential sanctuary, but as strategic territory to be acquired, and the badge in his pocket pulses with the weight of decisions that will determine whether his 17 people negotiate for shelter or simply take what they need. The farmhouse sits amid rolling pastures like something from the world before, but Shane's 10 weeks of leadership have taught him to evaluate beauty through tactical necessity rather than nostalgic sentiment. Herschel emerges from the farmhouse as Shane's convoy approaches, flanked by his daughters and farmhands, in a display that suggests defensive readiness beneath rural hospitality. The veterinarian carries himself with the authority of someone who's maintained control over his property despite the collapse of everything beyond its boundaries. "You folks lost?" Herschel calls out, when Shane's vehicles stop at the property line, his voice carrying politeness that doesn't quite mask wariness about armed strangers approaching his land. Shane steps out of the lead vehicle with tactical awareness rather than desperate gratitude, noting defensive positions, escape routes, and the locations of Herschel's people before responding. 10 weeks of leadership has taught him to assess every new contact as potential threat or resource, rather than accepting surface appearances. "We're looking for sustainable settlement location," Shane says, without approaching Herschel's position. "Medical facilities for pregnant women, agricultural resources for long-term community development, defensive advantages for security against organized threats in this region." The directness of Shane's approach immediately establishes different parameters than the charitable request Rick would have made. Instead of appealing to Herschel's humanitarian impulses, Shane presents a business proposition that defines value exchange rather than requesting charity. Herschel shifts uncomfortably, recognizing that these aren't refugees seeking temporary assistance, but an organized group evaluating his property for permanent occupation. "This is private land, family operation. We're not equipped to support additional residents." Carl steps forward with the tactical awareness Shane has developed in him, studying Herschel's defensive arrangements with 8-year-old eyes that have learned to identify weakness and opportunity. "Mr. Green, have you had problems with organized groups trying to take your farm?" The question Carl asks reflects Shane's strategic intelligence-gathering approach rather than social conversation. Information about external threats, defensive capabilities, and resource management that will influence tactical planning. Herschel looks at Carl with surprise, not expecting tactical sophistication from a child. "Some trouble with scavenging parties, nothing organized. Most folks respect property boundaries when they understand we're willing to defend them." Shane processes this intelligence through the framework of strategic planning that's kept his people alive for 10 weeks. Herschel's defensive posture suggests capability, but not coordination with other settlements or awareness of larger threats developing in the region. "Mr. Green, our intelligence indicates organized groups conducting territorial expansion operations throughout this area. Individual property defense is effective against scavenging parties, but insufficient against coordinated assault by multiple tactical units." Carol approaches with the radio intelligence she's been monitoring during their approach to the farm. "Sir, we've tracked communication traffic indicating systematic evaluation of agricultural resources by groups planning long-term territorial control. Your farm is exactly the kind of strategic asset they're prioritizing." The intelligence Carol provides demonstrates Shane's approach to negotiation, using superior information, gathering to establish value proposition, while highlighting vulnerability that his group can address. Herschel's discomfort increases as he realizes these aren't desperate survivors requesting aid, but tactical planners evaluating his situation with professional competence he lacks. "What exactly are you proposing?" Shane presents his terms with the matter-of-fact authority that's characterized his leadership since Rick's death. Mutual benefit arrangement. You provide agricultural resources, medical facilities, and sustainable settlement location. We provide perimeter security, tactical coordination, and protection against organized threats that individual farms can't handle alone. "And if I refuse?" Herschel asks, his veterinary training recognizing predator behavior disguised as cooperation. Shane's answer demonstrates the fundamental difference between his leadership philosophy and Rick's more diplomatic approach. "Then you continue managing individual property defense until organized groups with superior tactical capabilities decide they want your resources. We find alternative settlement location, and you handle whatever comes next independently." The negotiation that follows reveals Herschel's philosophical differences with Shane's approach to survival in collapsed society. Where Shane has learned to prioritize tactical advantage over moral idealism, Herschel maintains belief in humanitarian principles that assume other people share his values. "I don't believe in solving problems through intimidation or threat of force," Herschel says firmly. "This farm operates according to Christian principles of charity and mutual aid. Carl responds before Shane can speak, his 8-year-old voice carrying the authority of someone who's learned practical theology under Shane's guidance. Mr. Green, Christian charity works when everyone follows Christian principles. When some people follow different principles, charity becomes weakness that gets charitable people killed. Shane feels pride watching Carl apply logical analysis to moral philosophy, demonstrating the kind of strategic thinking that separates survival from sentiment in the world they actually inhabit. Carl's right about the tactical reality, Shane adds. Your Christian principles are admirable, but they assume other people share your moral framework. Our experience indicates that assumption gets communities destroyed by people who don't share your values. The philosophical debate that follows is interrupted by practical crisis when Carl is shot during a hunting expedition that demonstrates both the effectiveness of Shane's training and its moral costs. Shane has been teaching Carl advanced tracking and hunting techniques that go beyond basic survival skills into tactical stalking capabilities. Where Rick would have taught Carl to hunt for sustenance, Shane teaches him to hunt with military precision that could apply to human targets as well as game animals. Breathing control, sight alignment, trigger discipline, Shane instructs Carl as they track deer through Herschel's pastures. The same skills that put food on our table also protect our family from people who want to take our food. The hunting lesson proceeds according to Shane's tactical training protocols until Carl, demonstrating the aggressive, pursuing behavior Shane has encouraged, follows wounded game into dense brush where Otis, one of Herschel's farm hands, misidentifies movement and fires. The bullet that hits Carl represents the cost of Shane's approach to childhood education. More capable, more aggressive, more willing to take risks that produce both better results and higher potential consequences. Shane's response to Carl's injury demonstrates leadership philosophy that prioritizes effective action over collaborative decision-making. Instead of requesting Herschel's medical assistance or negotiating for surgical intervention, Shane implements tactical extraction that treats Carl's care as operational necessity rather than charitable request. Medical emergency protocol, Shane announces as he carries Carl toward the farmhouse. Full surgical intervention required, all available resources dedicated to patient stabilization and treatment. Herschel attempts to establish medical authority over Carl's treatment, but Shane's approach eliminates discussion in favor of immediate action coordination. Dr. Green, you have veterinary surgical capability and pharmaceutical access. We have tactical security and resource procurement capability. Carl gets whatever medical intervention is required, and we coordinate our capabilities to achieve that objective. The surgical intervention that follows saves Carl's life while demonstrating Shane's approach to resource acquisition through strength rather than request. Herschel provides medical expertise because Shane's group provides security and support that makes resistance impractical rather than because he chooses to be charitable. During Carl's recovery period, Shane makes the tactical decision that defines his group's relationship with Herschel's farm permanently. Shane breaks into Herschel's barn. In Rick's world, the barn discovery would have led to lengthy moral discussion about the nature of walkers, the possibility of cure, and respect for Herschel's beliefs about his transformed family members. In Shane's world, it represents a security threat that requires immediate elimination. Operational security breach, Shane announces as he emerges from the barn with his weapon drawn. Hostile walker concentration in agricultural storage facility presents immediate threat to community safety. Herschel rushes toward the barn with obvious distress. Those are family members, people from our community who became ill. They're secured. They're not threatening anyone. Shane's response reflects 10 weeks of leadership decisions that prioritize tactical reality over sentimental attachment. Dr. Green, those are reanimated corpses that will kill everyone here if containment fails. They're not people anymore, and keeping them represents operational security liability that endangers living people, including my son. The elimination that follows proceeds according to Shane's tactical protocols rather than Herschel's humanitarian preferences. Coordinated elimination by Shane's people, systematic clearing of all Walker threats, tactical disposal that prevents reoccupation by additional hostile forces. Carl watches the barn clearing operation from his recovery position with interest rather than trauma, understanding it as necessary security procedure rather than violent destruction of Herschel's family. Good tactical decision, Carl observes, as Shane's people eliminate the final walkers. Keeping infected family members in storage areas creates vulnerability that organized groups could exploit. Herschel collapses with grief that Shane recognizes as emotional liability rather than understandable human response. You had no right. Those were my neighbors, my family members. They deserved dignity and respect. Shane's answer demonstrates leadership philosophy that's kept his people alive, while other communities have fallen to exactly the kind of sentimental attachment Herschel represents. Dr. Green, dead people don't deserve anything. Living people deserve protection from dead people who want to kill them. Our job is protecting the living, not honoring the dead. The barn incident establishes Shane's tactical control over farm operations while demonstrating the cost of his leadership approach. Effective security achieved through destruction of Herschel's moral authority and community values. Sophia's rescue operation confirms Shane's evolution from tactical leadership to strategic conquest of territory and resources. When Sophia goes missing during the barn clearing operation, Shane coordinates search and recovery with military precision rather than desperate searching. Systematic grid coverage, communication protocols, tactical coordination that locates and extracts Sophia within hours rather than days or weeks. Search Pattern Alpha implemented, Carroll reports through Tactical Radio Network. Target located in defensive position, approximately 800 meters southeast of primary structures. Extraction team deployed, Shane responds. Standard recovery protocol, hostile elimination, as required for target security. The rescue operation that follows saves Sophia while demonstrating Shane's group's tactical superiority over individual survival attempts. Coordinated movement, overlapping security coverage, communication discipline that enables successful extraction without casualties. Sophia's rescue proves Shane's value proposition to Herschel's people, superior tactical capabilities that produce results individual efforts couldn't achieve. But the cost of that tactical superiority becomes evident in the transformation of Herschel's farm from family operation to military base under Shane's operational control. Perimeter security implementation, Shane announces as his people establish defensive positions around Herschel's property. Standard protocols, rotating guard assignments, communication networks that enable coordinated response to external threats. Herschel objects with increasing desperation as he realizes Shane's group has transitioned from guests to occupying force. This is my property. You don't have authority to implement military procedures on my land. Shane's response reflects leadership philosophy that prioritizes practical control over legal authority in a world where law enforcement no longer exists. Dr. Green, authority comes from capability rather than ownership when survival is at stake. We have capability to protect this property from organized threats. You have capability to provide medical and agricultural resources. Authority follows from results rather than legal documents. The integration that follows demonstrates Shane's approach to community building through demonstrated effectiveness rather than democratic consensus. Herschel's people accept Shane's tactical coordination because it produces security and resource management capabilities they lack individually. Maggie and Beth adapt to Shane's operational protocols with varying degrees of acceptance. Glenn establishes communication and technical support coordination that enhances both groups' capabilities. Herschel maintains medical authority while accepting Shane's security authority. Most importantly, Carl's recovery under Herschel's medical care, while protected by Shane's tactical security, demonstrates the kind of integrated community capabilities that Shane's leadership creates. Successful territorial acquisition through demonstrated value rather than negotiated agreement. Shane records in his leadership log as his people establish permanent operations at Green Farm. Agricultural resources secured, medical facilities operational, defensive positions established against external threats. That night, as Shane conducts his final security check of their new permanent settlement, Laurie approaches him with the kind of strategic question that defines their community's future development. How long before Herschel accepts that this is our home, now, instead of his? She asks. Shane touches the badge in his pocket, feeling its weight settle into long-term planning that extends beyond immediate survival toward multi-generational community development. Dr. Green accepts our permanent residence when he realizes that accepting it voluntarily produces better outcomes for his people than having it imposed through tactical necessity. But acceptance doesn't matter as much as cooperation, and cooperation follows from results rather than sentiment. And if he never accepts it voluntarily? Shane considers the question through the leadership framework that's guided his decisions for 10 weeks of keeping 17 people alive in a world that punishes weakness and rewards capability. Then Dr. Green learns to cooperate with tactical reality instead of hoping for restoration of moral authority that ended when society collapsed. Our children grow up in a community that works rather than a community that feels good about itself. Laurie rests her hand on her stomach, feeling for movement from the child who will inherit the world Shane's territorial acquisition has created. Carl seems comfortable with how we took this place. Shane looks toward the farmhouse, where his 8-year-old son sleeps safely in a bed protected by tactical security he helped establish, medical facilities Shane's negotiation secured, and agricultural resources Shane's leadership appropriated through demonstrated strength. Carl understands that building something permanent requires taking and holding what you need rather than hoping other people will share what you want. That understanding will serve him better than moral idealism when he's old enough to lead communities himself. The badge grows warm against Shane's chest as he considers the territorial control his group has established through tactical superiority rather than charitable request. Agricultural sustainability, medical infrastructure, defensive advantages that enable long-term community development. Most importantly, proof that Shane's leadership philosophy produces superior outcomes for his people's survival and prosperity than Rick's more diplomatic approach would have achieved. Tomorrow there will be continued integration of farm operations under Shane's tactical coordination, enhanced medical monitoring for Laurie's pregnancy, and strategic planning for expanding their territorial control to include additional agricultural and resource extraction capabilities. Tonight, Shane leads 17 people who've learned the difference between asking for shelter and taking what they need to build their future, between hoping for acceptance and establishing control through demonstrated capability, between Rick's idealistic approach to community building and Shane's practical approach to territorial acquisition. The badge pulses with warmth in the darkness, carrying the authority of the dead world and the responsibility of the living one, worn by a leader who's learned that sometimes the greatest gift you can give your children is a community strong enough to take and hold what it needs to survive and prosper. 17 survivors plus 1 unborn child, sleeping securely in territory they control through tactical superiority rather than moral authority, guided by leadership that's proven effective. Resource acquisition produces better outcomes than humanitarian sentiment in a world that rewards strength over righteousness. There's a sound on the wind at 3:15 a.m. that Carol Pelletier recognizes from Shane's tactical briefings about herd behavior patterns, and the radio crackles to life with her voice carrying practiced calm instead of the panic that might have characterized this moment in Rick's world. Command, this is North Watch. I have audio signatures consistent with major herd movement. Estimated 100+ walkers approaching from Atlanta direction. Distance approximately 2 kilometers and closing. Shane's response comes immediately through the tactical communication network he's established since taking operational control of Green Farm. Copy North Watch. All stations implement Condition Alpha protocols. This is not a drill. Repeat, Condition Alpha is now in effect. The transformation that follows represents weeks of tactical preparation that Shane has implemented since establishing territorial control over Herschel's property. Where Rick's group would have faced this crisis through desperate improvisation, Shane's people execute practiced procedures from prepared positions with coordinated timing that turns potential catastrophe into managed combat operation. Carol continues her intelligence reporting as Shane's people move to assigned positions without confusion or delay. Command, herd movement patterns suggest they're following scent trail rather than random wandering. Something has drawn them specifically toward our location. Shane climbs to the observation post he's constructed on the farmhouse roof, studying the tactical situation through night vision equipment Glenn acquired during their CDC operations. The badge in his pocket pulses with familiar weight as he processes intelligence and calculates response options that will determine whether his community survives its first major combat test. Estimated strength 300 walkers, moving in coordinated formation that suggests external stimulus. Shane broadcasts through the tactical network. Pattern indicates organized herding rather than natural migration. T-Dog's voice responds from the southern perimeter, where Shane has positioned their heavy weapons capability. Command, that's twice the numbers our standard defensive positions are designed to handle. Should we implement evacuation protocols? In Rick's world, this would have been the obvious decision. Retreat before superior numbers. Preserve lives through tactical withdrawal. Regroup at secondary positions for future planning. But Shane's leadership has prepared for scenarios that require defending territory rather than abandoning it. Negative on evacuation, Shane responds with the authority of someone who's spent weeks planning for exactly this situation. We implement controlled engagement, break up herd formation using diversionary tactics, then systematic elimination from prepared positions. Andrea's voice crackles through the radio from her assigned sniper position in the barn loft. Command, diversionary tactics against numbers this size carry significant risk of tactical failure. If the plan doesn't work, we'll be trapped in defensive positions without evacuation options. Shane appreciates Andrea's tactical analysis while rejecting her risk assessment based on intelligence she doesn't possess. Andrea, evacuation guarantees loss of territorial control and resource base we've established here. Successful defense guarantees permanent security and continued community development. Risk calculation favors controlled engagement over retreat. The decision Shane makes represents the fundamental difference between his leadership philosophy and Rick's more cautious approach to crisis management. Where Rick would have prioritized preserving lives through withdrawal, Shane chooses to risk lives to preserve the community they've built. Carl emerges from the farmhouse with tactical equipment rather than panicked confusion, his recovery from the shooting having been managed according to Shane's training protocols that maintain combat readiness even during medical treatment. At 8 years old, Carl can operate communication equipment, identify defensive positions, and execute emergency procedures with competence that enables tactical contribution rather than requiring protection resources. "Shane, I've got the backup radio system operational," Carl reports, with the calm efficiency Shane has developed in him. All communication channels tested and functional. Shane feels pride watching Carl contribute tactical capability to their defense operation, while most 8-year-old children would require evacuation resources that compromise community combat effectiveness. "Outstanding work, Carl. Maintain communication coordination with all defensive positions. Report any frequency interference or system failures immediately." Laurie approaches Shane's command position with tactical intelligence rather than emotional objection to the dangerous situation threatening their community. Her pregnancy has been managed according to medical protocols that maintain her integration with defensive operations rather than isolating her as liability requiring special protection. "Shane, I've been monitoring the radio traffic Glenn taught me to track. There's organized communication suggesting this herd movement isn't natural migration. Someone's driving them toward us deliberately." The intelligence Laurie provides confirms Shane's strategic assessment about organized threats in their operational area. Hostile groups using walker herds as weapons against communities they want to eliminate or control. "Tactical assessment confirmed," Shane announces through the radio network. "Herd movement represents coordinated assault by hostile forces using walkers as cover or distraction for organized attack on our position." Glenn's voice responds from the technical support station, where Shane has assigned him communication and surveillance coordination. "Command, if this is coordinated assault, defending against the walker herd might expose us to human attack when our people are engaged in combat operations." Shane considers Glenn's tactical concern while maintaining his decision to defend territory rather than retreat. "Glenn, organized assault requires this community to be eliminated or weakened before hostile takeover. Successful defense against walker assault demonstrates tactical capability that discourages human attack." The defensive operation that Shane coordinates represents tactical sophistication that would have been impossible under Rick's more democratic leadership approach. Instead of desperate improvisation, Shane's people execute practiced procedures from prepared positions with coordination that maximizes combat effectiveness while minimizing casualties. "Phase 1 implementation," Shane broadcasts. "T-Dog and Carol initiate controlled burn operations on the eastern perimeter. Andrea and Amy maintain overwatch and target elimination of herd leaders. Glenn, coordinate communication with all defensive positions. The controlled fires that T-Dog and Carol set, according to Shane's tactical plan, create barriers that fragment the herd formation, breaking up coordinated movement into smaller groups that can be eliminated systematically rather than overwhelming defensive positions through mass assault." Carol's voice reports success of diversionary tactics that demonstrate Shane's strategic planning. "Command, controlled burn operations are fragmenting herd formation as planned. Estimate 70% of herd strength diverted toward secondary burn areas." Shane's tactical gamble succeeds because he's prepared for scenarios that require defending territory rather than preserving lives through retreat. The walker herd fragments, according to his planned fire breaks, creating manageable combat situations rather than overwhelming assault. Phase 2 implementation, Shane announces, as his diversionary tactics prove effective. All defensive positions, systematic elimination of fragmented walker groups, standard coordination protocols, overlapping fields of fire, ammunition conservation procedures. The elimination phase that follows showcases weeks of tactical training under Shane's leadership. Andrea and Amy coordinate precision targeting from elevated positions. T-Dog and Glenn provide suppression fire that prevents walker concentration. Carol maintains communication and tactical intelligence from mobile observation post. Most importantly, Shane's people function as integrated combat unit rather than collection of individuals trying to protect themselves independently. Herschel emerges from the farmhouse, where Shane had ordered him to remain during combat operations, carrying medical supplies rather than weapons, because Shane has assigned him non-combat roles that utilize his capabilities without compromising tactical coordination. Casualties? Herschel asks, as Shane's people eliminate the final fragmented walker groups threatening their perimeter. 0 combat losses, Shane reports with satisfaction that validates his decision to defend rather than retreat. Minor injuries requiring basic medical attention, no critical wounds, all personnel combat effective. The tactical success of Shane's defensive operation becomes undeniable as his people report systematic elimination of walker threats without losing control of their territory or suffering significant casualties. But the cost of that tactical success emerges when organized hostile forces implement the second phase of their coordinated assault, human attack during what they assumed would be walker-weakened defensive positions. Command, I have vehicle movement approaching from multiple directions, Andrea reports from her elevated position. Estimate 15 to 20 hostile personnel in coordinated assault formation. Shane recognizes this as the scenario his tactical planning has prepared for. Human assault following walker attack, designed to overwhelm communities weakened by defensive combat against the undead. All positions, implement anti-personnel combat protocols, Shane broadcasts with the authority of someone whose preparations have anticipated this exact situation. Hostile human forces conducting coordinated assault, standard rules of engagement, no prisoners, no negotiations. The human combat that follows demonstrates the fundamental difference between Shane's leadership approach and Rick's more humanitarian philosophy. Where Rick would have attempted communication or sought non-violent resolution, Shane coordinates lethal response that eliminates threats rather than hoping for peaceful outcomes. Otis, one of Herschel's farmhands, objects to Shane's engagement protocols with moral concerns that would have found support in Rick's leadership approach. Those are people out there. We should try talking before shooting. Shane's response reflects leadership philosophy that prioritizes his community's survival over abstract moral principles. Otis, people who coordinate assault operations against our community during walker attacks aren't interested in conversation. They're interested in taking our resources and eliminating our people. Carl contributes to the tactical discussion with analysis that demonstrates Shane's success in developing strategic thinking in the next generation. Mr. Otis, if they wanted to talk, they would have approached during daylight with visible non-hostile intentions. Night assault following walker attack means they plan to kill us and take our stuff. Shane feels pride watching Carl apply logical analysis to threat assessment while recognizing the moral cost of developing tactical sophistication in 8-year-old children. The elimination of hostile human forces proceeds according to Shane's engagement protocols, with coordinated fire that neutralizes organized assault before it can establish tactical advantage over defensive positions. Hostile force elimination complete, T-Dog reports through the tactical network. 15 confirmed eliminations, no survivors, captured equipment available for community resource enhancement. But the cost of Shane's tactical victory becomes evident in its effect on Herschel's people, who witness combat efficiency that demonstrates both protective capability and moral transformation that fundamentally changes community character. Maggie approaches Shane after the combat operations conclude, her face reflecting shock at the coordinated lethality her community has become capable of under his leadership. That wasn't defense, Shane. That was warfare. Shane's response demonstrates leadership philosophy that accepts moral costs in exchange for tactical effectiveness. Maggie, defense against organized assault requires warfare capabilities. Communities that refuse to develop warfare capabilities get eliminated by communities that embrace them. Beth supports her sister's moral concerns with questions about community values that Rick would have prioritized alongside tactical effectiveness. What kind of people are we becoming if this is how we solve problems? Carl answers before Shane can respond, his voice carrying the moral framework Shane has developed in him through weeks of tactical education. We're becoming the kind of people who stay alive when other people try to kill us. That's more important than being the kind of people who feel good about ourselves while we're dying. The tactical success of Shane's defensive operation creates strategic advantages that validate his approach to territorial control and community development. The farm remains under his control, enhanced by captured equipment and eliminated threat from organized hostile forces in their operational area. But the moral cost of that strategic success becomes evident in Herschel's response to Shane's demonstration of community capabilities under his leadership. "This isn't what I agreed to when you asked for medical cooperation," Herschel says, as he surveys the battlefield Shane's tactical coordination has created on his property. "This is military occupation disguised as mutual benefit." Shane considers Herschel's objection while feeling the badge pulse against his chest with weight that includes both Rick's memory and Shane's authority over the community they've built together. "Dr. Green, what you agreed to doesn't matter as much as what works. My people are alive, your property is secure, and organized threats in this area have been eliminated through tactical superiority. Results matter more than agreements when survival is at stake." The integration that follows demonstrates Shane's approach to community building through demonstrated effectiveness rather than moral consensus. Herschel's people accept Shane's tactical authority because it produces security and resource management they couldn't achieve independently. Maggie and Beth adapt to Shane's operational protocols with varying degrees of acceptance that prioritizes practical cooperation over philosophical agreement. Glenn establishes enhanced communication and technical support that incorporates captured equipment from eliminated hostile forces. Most importantly, Shane's community proves its capability to take and hold territory against both walker threats and organized human assault through tactical coordination that would have been impossible under Rick's more humanitarian leadership approach. Successful territorial defense through coordinated tactical response, Shane records in his leadership log as his people establish enhanced security around their permanent settlement. Walker assault neutralized through diversionary tactics and systematic elimination. Human assault eliminated through coordinated lethal response. Community tactical capabilities proven under combat conditions. That night, as Shane conducts final security assessment of their defended territory, Laurie approaches him with the kind of strategic question that defines their community's future development. "How many more attacks like this do you think we'll face?" she asks, her hand resting on her stomach, where their child continues developing, despite the combat operations surrounding them. Shane touches the badge in his pocket, feeling its weight settle into long-term planning that includes tactical realities their child will inherit, along with the community they're building, through strength rather than sentiment. Dr. Green's farm is strategically valuable agricultural territory. Other organized groups will evaluate our tactical capabilities and decide whether conquest attempts are worth their potential losses. Tonight's defensive operation establishes reputation that should discourage most future assault attempts. And if it doesn't discourage them? Shane considers the question through the leadership framework that's kept 17 people alive through 10 weeks of tactical decisions in a world that rewards capability over character. Then we eliminate them the same way we eliminated tonight's assault force, and our reputation becomes stronger with each successful defense. Eventually, organized groups will focus on easier targets rather than testing our community's tactical capabilities. What about Herschel? He's obviously struggling with what we've become. Shane looks toward the farmhouse, where Herschel tends minor injuries from the night's combat operations, while processing the moral implications of community survival achieved through coordinated warfare against human threats. Dr. Green adapts to tactical reality or becomes liability that compromises community security. His medical capabilities are valuable, but his moral objections to effective defense are dangerous luxury we can't afford. The badge grows warm against Shane's chest as he considers the territorial control his community has established through tactical superiority that proves his leadership philosophy produces superior outcomes for his people's survival and prosperity. Tomorrow there will be enhanced security operations, captured equipment integration, and strategic planning for expanding their defensive capabilities to include additional agricultural and resource territories. Tonight, Shane leads 17 people who've learned the difference between hoping for peace and preparing for war, between moral idealism that feels good and tactical effectiveness that keeps people alive, between Rick's humanitarian approach to community building and Shane's military approach to territorial conquest. The badge pulses with warmth in the darkness, carrying the authority of the dead world and the responsibility of the living one, worn by a leader who's learned that sometimes the greatest protection you can offer your children is a community strong enough to eliminate threats, rather than hoping threats will leave them alone. 17 survivors, plus one unborn child, sleeping securely in territory they've defended through coordinated combat operations, guided by leadership that's proven tactical. Superiority produces better outcomes than moral sentiment in a world that rewards strength over righteousness. There's a moment in the pre-dawn quiet of Green Farm, when Laurie's contractions begin, that Shane Walsh understands the culmination of everything his leadership has built and cost, and the badge in his pocket pulses with weight that includes both Rick's memory and the future his decisions have created for their child. The farmhouse medical facility that Herschel maintains under Shane's tactical authority represents security and capability that would have been impossible in Rick's more idealistic world. But the moral isolation that surrounds that safety carries costs that Shane measures against his daughter's first cries. Laurie's labor proceeds according to medical protocols that combine Herschel's veterinary expertise with pharmaceutical resources Shane's group extracted from the CDC through tactical occupation rather than charitable request. The delivery takes place in a farmhouse defended by coordinated security that's proven effective against both walker herds and organized human assault, protected by tactical capabilities Rick would never have developed in his community. Healthy daughter, full-term development, no complications requiring advanced medical intervention, Herschel reports, as he completes the delivery that validates Shane's strategic decision to establish permanent territorial control over agricultural and medical resources. Shane holds his daughter for the first time while calculating the security arrangements and resource allocation required to protect her through childhood in a world that Rick never imagined his own son would have to navigate. This child will know only Shane's version of survival education, tactical thinking, and community values shaped by demonstrated effectiveness rather than moral idealism. "She's beautiful," Laurie says, as she recovers from delivery in medical facilities that Shane's territorial acquisition has secured for their family. "What should we name her?" Shane considers names that honor the past while acknowledging the world they've actually built for their children. "Judith, after my grandmother, who raised me to understand that protecting family sometimes requires becoming someone your enemies fear." Carl approaches his new sister with the tactical awareness Shane has developed in him, his 8-year-old mind automatically calculating security procedures and resource requirements that an infant adds to community defensive operations. "Judith Walsh," Carl says with satisfaction. "She's lucky to be born here instead of somewhere less safe." Shane feels pride watching Carl apply strategic thinking to family planning while recognizing the complete transformation of childhood that his leadership has created. Carl will never know the innocence Rick grew up with, but he possesses tactical competence that will keep him alive in ways Rick's moral education couldn't have achieved. "Carl, what kind of brother do you want to be to Judith?" Shane asks, curious about the values his tactical education has developed in the next generation. Carl's answer reflects 11 weeks of survival education under Shane's guidance. The kind of brother who teaches her everything she needs to know to protect herself and contribute to our community. The kind who makes sure she never has to depend on other people's charity or hope other people will protect her. The community celebration that follows Judith's birth demonstrates both the stability Shane's leadership has created and the moral cost of achieving that stability through tactical superiority over humanitarian sentiment. Andrea and Amy provide support and celebration that reflects genuine affection for Laurie and excitement about new life joining their community. But their congratulations carry undertones of tactical assessment about resource allocation and security requirements that infant care adds to defensive operations. T-Dog contributes mechanical modifications to their living spaces that accommodate infant care while maintaining tactical readiness for rapid evacuation or defensive action. His work reflects community values that prioritize effectiveness over comfort in ways Rick's leadership would never have required. Glenn coordinates communication protocols that account for infant noise discipline during security operations, tactical considerations that demonstrate how every aspect of community life has been subordinated to military effectiveness under Shane's authority. Most significantly, Carol approaches Shane with intelligence reports that demonstrate both the success of his leadership philosophy and its cost in relationships with potential allies throughout their operational region. "Shane, I've been monitoring radio traffic from other survivor communities in our area. The consensus opinion is that Green Farm has become a military compound that eliminates rather than cooperates with neighboring groups." Shane studies Carol's intelligence reports while holding his daughter, weighing strategic implications of their community's reputation against the security that reputation provides for Judith's childhood. "Assessment of our tactical relationship with external communities?" Shane asks. Carol's answer reflects the analytical capabilities Shane has developed in her through weeks of tactical education. "Complete isolation. Other communities view us as territorial threat rather than potential ally. Our defensive capabilities are respected, but our willingness to use lethal force against human threats has eliminated diplomatic options." Shane considers this intelligence through the leadership framework that's guided his decisions for 11 weeks of keeping his people alive in a world that punishes weakness and rewards capability. And the strategic implications of that isolation? We're strong enough to defend what we have, but we'll have to take rather than trade for anything we need beyond our current resource base. Other communities won't risk peaceful contact with us. Shane nods, accepting the strategic reality that his tactical approach has created. In Rick's world, building relationships with neighboring communities would have been essential for long-term survival. In Shane's world, demonstrating strength that discourages territorial challenges serves the same function more reliably. That afternoon, Dale's death proves the final validation of Shane's leadership philosophy, while demonstrating its moral cost. Dale, who has maintained humanitarian objections to Shane's tactical approach throughout their community development, encounters a walker during individual exploration of the farm's outer boundaries. In Rick's world, Dale's death would have represented tragic accident during peaceful activity. In Shane's world, it represents tactical failure during unauthorized movement outside secure perimeter. The walker that kills Dale escaped Shane's systematic elimination protocols because Dale had argued for preserving some walkers as reminders of our humanity, rather than eliminating all threats within their operational area. Dale's death validates Shane's approach to threat elimination, while proving the cost of sentimental attachment to moral principles that compromise community security. Individual tactical failure resulting in preventable casualty, Shane records in his leadership log as Dale's body is recovered and processed according to security protocols. Humanitarian sentiment, overriding tactical discipline, created vulnerability that organized defensive procedures would have eliminated. Carl processes Dale's death with the analytical framework Shane has taught him to apply to tactical lessons and community security education. Dale died because he thought keeping some walkers was more important than keeping all people safe. Shane feels sadness at Dale's loss, combined with recognition that Carl has learned the essential lesson about survival priorities that Dale never accepted. Dale was a good man who tried to preserve moral principles from the world before. But good intentions don't protect people in the world we actually live in. So the lesson is that being right about tactics matters more than being right about morality? Carl asks. Shane touches the badge in his pocket, feeling its weight settle into lessons he's teaching his son about leadership and survival in a world that Rick never had to navigate. The lesson is that keeping people alive is the first moral requirement. Everything else is luxury that we earn through effective survival, not wishful thinking about human nature. Dale's funeral demonstrates the community values Shane's leadership has created through 11 weeks of tactical education and survival discipline. Brief ceremony focused on Dale's contributions to community survival, rather than extended grieving that compromises operational effectiveness. Practical discussion of resource redistribution and tactical responsibility reassignment, rather than prolonged mourning. Most importantly, community consensus that Dale's death represents educational opportunity about tactical discipline, rather than tragedy requiring philosophical re-evaluation. That evening, as Shane conducts final security assessment of their permanent settlement, he climbs to the observation post where he can survey everything his leadership has built and cost over 11 weeks of survival education. The farm spreads below him, like evidence of tactical success: defended perimeters, organized resource production, coordinated community operations that function with military efficiency. 18 people, including Judith, who sleep safely because Shane makes decisions that prioritize their survival over abstract moral principles or hope for human goodness. But Shane also sees evidence of the moral cost his tactical approach has required. Complete isolation from neighboring communities who view them as territorial threat. Community values that prioritize effectiveness over compassion in ways Rick would never have accepted. Children who've learned tactical thinking and strategic analysis instead of the innocence Rick would have tried to preserve. Laurie approaches Shane's observation post with their daughter, joining him in evaluating what they've built together during recovery from delivery in medical facilities Shane's territorial acquisition has secured for their family. "What do you think Rick would say if he could see us now?" Laurie asks quietly. Shane studies his daughter's face while considering the question that's haunted him since taking Rick's badge and authority 11 weeks ago. Rick would be horrified by what we've become. He'd see the isolation, the willingness to use lethal force, the way we've taught Carl to think tactically instead of morally. He'd argue that we've preserved our lives while losing our humanity. And what would you say to him? Shane touches the badge that carries both Rick's memory and Shane's authority, feeling its weight settle into final assessment of leadership decisions that have shaped their community's survival and values. I'd tell Rick that humanity is a luxury we earn through survival, not a principle we preserve through wishful thinking. I'd tell him that Carl and Judith will grow up alive and capable in the world we actually inhabit, instead of dead and innocent in the world he wanted to preserve. Do you think he'd understand? Shane considers Rick's character, his moral principles, his belief in human goodness that would have shaped very different approaches to every crisis they have faced since his death. Rick would understand the necessity, but he'd never accept the cost. He'd keep believing there was a better way, right up until that better way got his family killed. Laurie shifts Judith to a more comfortable position while processing Shane's assessment of leadership philosophy and moral compromise. And you're comfortable with the cost? Shane looks at his daughter, who will inherit a community built through tactical superiority and moral compromise, who will learn survival skills Rick would have considered too harsh for children, who will grow up in isolation from neighboring communities because Shane chose effectiveness over diplomatic sentiment. I'm comfortable with the results, Shane says finally. Judith will learn to protect herself and contribute to community security. Carl has developed tactical capabilities that will keep him alive when moral idealism would get him killed. Our community functions through demonstrated effectiveness rather than hoped-for charity from people who might not share our values. But Shane feels the badge pulse against his chest, carrying all the weight of Rick's memory and all the authority of Shane's reality, worn by a father who's learned that sometimes the greatest protection you can offer your children is becoming someone your best friend wouldn't recognize. But Rick was right about one thing. We've become something fundamentally different from the people we were before. Whether that's evolution or degradation depends on whether you measure success by survival statistics or moral principles. The final entry Shane makes in his leadership log that night reflects 11 weeks of tactical decision-making that has transformed 18 people from desperate survivors into effective community with territorial control and defensive capabilities. Successful community establishment through tactical superiority and resource acquisition. 18 personnel, including newborn daughter, permanent territorial control, proven defensive capabilities against walker and human threats. Complete isolation from external communities due to reputation for lethal response to territorial challenges. Community values prioritize effectiveness over sentiment, survival over idealism, demonstrated capability over hoped-for cooperation. Shane closes the log and touches the badge one final time before heading to his quarters, where Laurie and their daughter sleep safely in a farmhouse. Defended by tactical coordination Rick would never have developed. Tomorrow there will be continued security operations, enhanced agricultural development, and strategic planning for expanding territorial control to include additional resource extraction and community defense capabilities. Tonight, Shane leads 17 people plus his newborn daughter who've learned the difference between hoping for rescue and building something strong enough to defend itself, between moral idealism that feels righteous and tactical effectiveness that keeps families alive, between Rick's humanitarian approach to community building and Shane's military approach to territorial survival. The badge grows warm in the darkness, carrying the authority of the dead world and the responsibility of the living one, worn by a leader who's learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your children is give them a community strong enough to take and hold what it needs to survive and prosper. Rick's badge, but Shane's authority. Rick's moral legacy, but Shane's tactical reality. Rick's best friend, transformed into someone Rick would barely recognize, but whose decisions have created a future where Carl and Judith will grow up alive, capable, and protected by community values that prioritize their survival over the comfort of strangers. The badge carries all of that weight in the darkness, warm against the chest of a father who's learned that love sometimes looks like hardness, protection sometimes requires isolation, and building something permanent for your children sometimes means becoming someone your old friends would fear. But his children sleep safely tonight, and in Shane's world, that has to be enough.